Chapter 599. Gu Nianji no longer had her security privileges as before. When he left the country there would be no warning from the customs. Because her passport had been changed, the customs computer's level 1 warning system was still targeting her old passport. When she used her new passport to scan the customs, it did not cause any disturbance at all. If Gu Nianji hadn't been worried that Yin Shixiang or Zhao Liangzi would come looking for her, she wouldn't have even told them. She had been worried that if she told them, they would stop her from going to Germany and cause trouble for Huoxiao. However, in the end, she still took the initiative to tell them. Fortunately, Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi didn't say anything to stop her. Instead, they encouraged her to take the opportunity to go abroad and have fun. Gu Nianji was overjoyed and once again confirmed that Huoxiaoheng should be in Germany. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi both looked like they were happy to see it happen, which made her feel even more confident. Of course, after coming to Germany, Gu Nianji realized how difficult it was to find Huoxiaoheng. She had no idea where to start, and Huoxiaoheng didn't seem to have any intention of contacting her. She wouldn't foolishly ask around about Huoxiaoheng's whereabouts. Deep down in her heart, her wildest dream was nothing more than a chance encounter at the Yizar River. Now that she received a call from the Wuxia Empire, Gu Nianji was a little dazed. She composed herself and said to Gu Yanran, "Sis, I'm traveling overseas." "Go abroad? Where did you go?" Gu Yanran's voice was filled with suspicion. "Are you with Huoxiao?" Gu Nianji thought to herself that she wanted to as well. Unfortunately there wasn't, but Gu Yanran didn't need to know. "I came out with a few friends." "Sis, what's the matter?" Gu Nianji replied vaguely as if she had an olive in her mouth. "I'm worried about you. I haven't seen you in a few days. I went to your dorm to look for you, but your roommate said you weren't in school and went out. I asked her where you went but she didn't know." Gu Yanran acted like a good sister. "Nianji, you're so naughty. You run off so easily just like when you were young." No matter how Gu Nianji listened to it, she felt that his words sounded awkward. Of course she was the same as when she was young because that was her. Gu Yanran's brain wasn't working very well. Gu Nianji silently cursed Gu Yanran's intelligence as she smiled and said, "I didn't tell Chichi, so Chichi doesn't know where I went. If you ask her, won't she be confused as well?" "Then where did you go? You should at least tell my sister, right?" Gu Yanran pressed the phone tightly to her ear. On the other side of the room, Yi Xian sat on the sofa. On the coffee table in front of him was a machine that continuously flashed red and blue lights. It was tracking Gu Nianji's phone signal. If Gu Nianji didn't want to say something, no one would be able to get it out of her. Of course, she wouldn't just stay silent. She would usually change the topic and let them forget what they were talking about. Gu Nianji sat on the sofa with her phone in her hand. As she dried her hair, she asked briskly, "Sis, how's father?" "I have already regained my identity as the daughter of the Gu family for a long time. When will you let me officially return to the Gu family? I'm in credit card debt for this trip abroad. I listened to you and didn't use Huoxiao's money, but are you going to pay me back for the credit card debt? I don't want to be a card slave." Gu Yanran couldn't help but sigh in relief. Smiling, she said, "Sure, when are you coming back? I'll be honest with you. These past few years the Gu family has spent a lot and earned very little. Others may think we're doing well, but it's all empty shells. You'll know when you come back." "Okay, I'll stop talking. I have to go discuss business with someone. It's not easy to earn money." Gu Nianji sounded very disappointed. "Sis, don't be so busy. When are you going to transfer the money to me?" Just as she was asking, she suddenly heard another person's cold voice on the phone. "Gu Nianji, that's enough. Your sister is working so hard to maintain the Gu family, unlike you. You only know how to spend money." It was actually Yi Xian's voice. Gu Nianji froze. "Sis? You gave the phone to Yi Xian?" However, the other side hung up with a click. The sound was very strange. It sounded like the sound of electricity but also like the sound of a machine turning off. In any case, it wasn't the sound of a phone. Yi Xian was actually still in her sister's room at this time? Gu Nianji looked at her watch. It should be around 8 o'clock in the Wuxia Empire right now. Did the two of them have dinner together? She pouted and looked at her phone gloomily, thinking about the strange sound she had just heard. On the other end of the phone, Gu Yanran put away her phone and scolded Yi Xian, "Will you die if you don't speak?" Then she asked, "Did you find her whereabouts?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I only know that she should be in Europe. Her phone is equipped with anti-tracking devices, so it's not easy to track her down." "Europe? What is she doing in Europe?" Gu Yanran frowned. "This child doesn't even tell the truth. She always makes people worry. Yanran, why are you so nice to her? You're not even biological sisters." Yi Xian frowned and put away the devices on the coffee table into a special box. Xian, I won't allow you to say that. Her surname is Gu, so she's a member of the Gu family. What does it matter if we're biological sisters or not? Gu Yanran said slightly sullenly, appearing very protective of Gu Nianji. You're so kind, but Gu Nianji still doesn't appreciate it. I feel bad for you. Yi Xian slammed the box shut and held it in his hand. Alright, I'm leaving. I won't bother you anymore. Xian, don't be angry. Gu Yanran hugged Yi Xian's waist from behind. I'm worried about her. You know that she's been away from me for so many years. I'm worried that she's grown up wrong. This kind of big sister tone was why Yi Xian couldn't resist Gu Yanran. His breathing became heavy and he suddenly threw down the locked box. He turned around and hugged Gu Yanran, kissing her passionately on the lips. In the suite of the Munich Hilton Hotel in Germany, He Jichu had been standing silently to the side the entire time. Now that Gu Nianji had hung up, he finally asked, Gu Yanran called? Yeah, it was strange. She kept asking me where I was. Gu Nianji laughed. So I intentionally changed the subject and said some things that she instinctively avoided. As expected, she didn't pester me about where I was. Yeah, there's nothing to say to her. He Jichu smiled and sat down on the sofa in the living room. We'll hide your information from her for now, but we might not be able to hide it forever. The American law firm's website has the list of names for our trip this time. She only needs to look it up and she'll be able to find it. Oh. Gu Nianji didn't take it to heart. She was going overseas for work, so it didn't matter even if Gu Yanran found out. At most, she would scold her for lying to her. However, Gu Nianji felt that she had no obligation to tell Gu Yanran the truth. It wouldn't affect Gu Yanran's interests, so why did she have to report everything to her in detail? Did she really think she was her sister? Gu Nianji's memory hadn't recovered, and she hadn't nurtured her sisterhood with Gu Yanran before it was destroyed by Gu Yanran's attitude towards her. What could she do? She was also very desperate. Leaning back on the sofa, Gu Nianji felt the back of her neck start to ache again. She reached out to rub it and said, Going to court is really exhausting. I thought I'd seen the world and it's not my first time in court. I didn't think I would still be subconsciously nervous. Your neck hurts? He Jichu reached out to massage Gu Nianji, but she quickly jumped away and smiled. I don't dare to trouble Professor He. Only disciples serve their masters. I've never seen a master serve his disciples. Then why don't you just see it today? He Jichu laughed and stopped talking when he saw Gu Nianji's embarrassment. He stood up and asked, Where do you want to eat? I'm not familiar with this place at all. The white sausage in the morning was delicious, but it seems like it's only available for breakfast? Gu Nianji couldn't forget the Bavarian white sausage in the morning. It's only available in the morning in this hotel, but if you want to eat it, we can look outside. It should be easy to find. He Jichu turned to ask her, Do you want to go? Yeah, that's good. Gu Nianji went in to take out her Luboy sachet and followed He Jichu out of the hotel. They hailed a taxi at the entrance and asked the driver where the more famous restaurants were. The driver recommended a 4-star Michelin restaurant, and they went there excitedly. It turned out that the local driver's recommendation was reliable. German cuisine was famous for all kinds of pork knuckles dishes, such as the famous German pork knuckles that all gluttons on the blue planet knew. It was like the famous braised pork knuckles in the Wuxia Empire, but without soy sauce, the gelatin of the pork knuckles was almost melted. Just this dish alone was enough for Gu Nianji to eat for an entire afternoon. He Jichu ordered a black pepper seafood pork knuckle stew. It was salty and fragrant, and even someone like him, who always wanted red wine for meals, ate several slices of whole wheat bread with the pork knuckles. He Jichu used red wine with the pork knuckles, while Gu Nianji used black grape juice with the pork knuckles. Gu Nianji wanted to lick her fingers after eating and said to He Jichu longingly, Professor He, the pork here is so delicious. It's really fragrant. It's comparable to the specially supplied pork in the Wuxia Empire. Moreover, it was the taste of the food itself, not the taste of seasonings added to it. The best dishes were the taste of the food itself. The seasoning should be used to enhance the taste of the food itself and not steal the show. He Jichu was very picky about food, but he had to admit that the pork here tasted almost the same as the pork in his hometown. Eat more if you like it. I'll ask if they deliver. If they deliver, we'll order here for the next few days. He Jichu got up to call the waiter over and asked in German if they delivered. This was a local restaurant that provided both in-house and delivery. He Jichu ordered lunch and dinner with them and changed the menu every day to deliver to the Hilton Hotel. After lunch, He Jichu and Gu Nianji left the restaurant. They found the Hilton Hotel they were staying at on their phone map. It wasn't far from here. They didn't call a taxi again and just strolled back to digest after the meal. This is the first update. Please click on the monthly vote to see if you can vote. There are also recommendation votes. Today was Monday, especially with the recommendation votes. There will be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 600. It was an afternoon in Munich, and the sun shone down from the clear blue sky, softening the asphalt road. The two of them walked side by side on the sidewalk. The trees were dense and shady, and the cicadas chirped. They didn't feel hot walking under the trees. The Alps were not far from the edge of the city, and they could see the snow on the mountain ridges. Although it was summer at the foot of the mountain, the top was covered in snow all year round. Under the summer sun, it shone brilliantly like a diamond on a crown. It was breathtaking. Gunyenji pointed to the snow-covered peak in the distance and smiled. Professor He, it's beautiful, isn't it? I wonder if we still have time to go skiing in the mountains? This is the Bavarian mountains in the Alps, and the glaciers are more eroded. This isn't a good place to go skiing. Hijichu turned to look at her. You really want to go skiing? Why don't we go skiing in Switzerland after the lawsuit is over? They have the best ski resorts in the world. Skiing in Switzerland? Gunyenji's eyes began to drift. She had gone skiing with Huashaoheng before, but she was still young and didn't like sports. Now she couldn't even go with Huashaoheng. She sighed softly and shook her head to not let these things affect her emotions. It was already past 2 in the afternoon when she finally returned to the hotel with Hijichu. Gunyenji was much more energetic and didn't want to go back to her room for now. Her large eyes darted around the hotel lobby. Hijichu thought of something and suggested, "There's a coffee shop over there. Let's go have a seat?" There was a black female singer singing soul music in the corner of the coffee shop. Her voice was distant and moving like the sounds of nature. Her singing wasn't loud, and it was like the background music of a gurgling spring. Gunyenji wasn't 21 yet, so she couldn't enter bars in Germany. However, she could still go to coffee shops. Nodding, she followed Hijichu into the coffee shop and sat behind a few green palm trees to enjoy a moment of leisure. Hijichu ordered a glass of juice for Gunyenji and a cappuccino for himself, along with 2 small pieces of almond cheesecake. Gunyenji frowned. Professor He, I can't eat anymore. I'm so full. Have a piece with me, Hijichu said dryly as he pushed a plate of almond cheesecake to Gunyenji. Gunyenji looked at Hijichu's nervous expression and quietly picked up her spoon to take small bites. Hijichu breathed a sigh of relief and slowly finished his cake. The waiter standing at the side hurriedly came to take away the small plate of cake. After eating the cake, Hijichu and Gunyenji didn't speak again. They just sat quietly. Gunyenji was bored to death as she held her juice and pricked up her ears to eavesdrop on the conversations around her. Although everyone spoke very softly in such an environment, Gunyenji couldn't avoid hearing them because they were so close to each other and there were only a few potted palm trees. In particular, the people behind the palm trees were speaking English, and it was American English, so it was even easier to understand. John, the hunting season in the Alps is about to begin. Are you ready? Are you ready? You should be asking me how long I'm going to fight. Let me tell you, for this hunting season, I brought enough equipment. Once I enter the mountain, I will definitely stay for 2 months. Don't even think about stopping me. 2 months. Are you serious? From mid-August to mid-October? The entire hunting season is only 2 months. A few of them were talking excitedly. They even clearly mentioned the type of shotgun they were carrying and the bullets they were carrying. Gunyenji had learned shooting from Huashaoheng, so she was very familiar with all types of guns. As soon as she heard them mention the Remington M700 VTR, she knew it was a hunting rifle that was almost similar to an official sniper rifle because it was equipped with a very professional scope. For people who knew how to use guns, they could directly replace the scope of the hunting rifle model with a special scope for a sniper rifle. This way they could modify the hunting rifle into a real sniper rifle. People who used this kind of hunting rifle were true cold-blooded hunters. Not only could they hunt small animals such as foxes and badgers, but they could also hunt fierce beasts such as lions, tigers, and black bears. Gunyenji didn't speak. She quietly listened until they finished talking and left before quietly asking Hijichu, "Professor He, what's with the hunting season in the Alps?" "It's hunting season." Hijichu glanced at her. There are places in England that also have hunting season, and it attracts hunters from all over the world. Didn't you know? He thought Gunyenji would be familiar with it since she had grown up with Huashaoheng. However, Huashaoheng had never taken Gunyenji to hunt. To Huashaoheng, holding a gun meant killing people and saving people. What was the point of hunting innocent animals? He had never been interested in it. Gunyenji shook her head. "I don't know. I've never played it before. Yeah, I'll take you hunting when we have the chance. Hijichu nodded. I don't know much about the hunting season here, but it should be similar to England. The English hunting season is also around this time. The participating hunters ride horses and bring hunting dogs and weapons into the forest to encircle their prey. Gu Nianji looked down and took out her phone to search for information about hunting season. She tilted her head and looked at it for a long time before clicking her tongue. Why does it look so unreliable? Feels like life and death is fated. Are people really going? How can no one go for such an exciting game? Hijichu shook his head with a snicker. You have to sign a life and death agreement to enter the forest during hunting season. What do you think? Modern civilized society still had legally recognized life and death agreements. It was a wonder in Western society. Gu Nianji was only curious for a moment, but she lost interest after asking. She and Hijichu sat there for a while and waited for the juice and coffee to be finished before paying the bill and leaving. They had just entered the elevator and were about to go upstairs to their rooms when Hijichu's phone rang. He took it out and was shocked to see it was his father calling. His father rarely called him. Usually when he called, it was an emergency. Hijichu quickly picked up. Father, what's the matter? Hijichu's father said slowly over the phone, Happy birthday, Achu. Hijichu's throat tightened. He couldn't speak for a long time. Thank you, father. He finally managed to force out the words, but his throat was already choking. Gu Nianji looked at Hijichu curiously and was also shocked. Professor He, it's your birthday? In the small elevator, her voice was so clear and crisp that it echoed. Senior Mr. He heard it on the other end of the line. He frowned. Achu, who are you with? It was the second night. Just a reminder, recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today was Monday, so recommendation votes were especially important. Moi everyone. Chapter 601. Who else could it be? Hijichu smiled wryly at Gu Nianji. Okay, father, I'm going to hang up now. I still have a case here. I'll definitely come back to see you once it's over. Mr. He sighed. It's Nianji? Aren't you going to bring her back? Hijichu didn't respond. Mr. He spoke very quietly, so Gu Nianji didn't hear him. She wasn't listening either. She was only thinking that today was Professor He's birthday. No wonder he asked her to eat cake with him. It was a birthday cake. Hijichu hung up the phone. The elevator had already reached their floor. Gu Nianji stepped out of the elevator, her eyes sparkling. She smiled at Hijichu. Professor He, happy birthday? Hijichu didn't care about her casual greeting. You don't have to be so polite. Birthdays are celebrated every year. It's nothing special. How is it not special? Gu Nianji felt bad. Professor He, let me give you a birthday present. Gu Nianji's heart softened when she saw Hijichu all alone. No one even celebrated his birthday for him. Okay, I'll be waiting. Hijichu didn't stand on ceremony at all. His shimmering, sultry eyes twinkled. This is your first birthday present for me. You have to be thoughtful. If it's not, I won't accept it. Gu Nianji was speechless. There was such a thing? He had to be picky about presents. Gu Nianji thought to herself. Of course she didn't dare say it out loud. She smiled and spread her hands. Then how should I say it's good? Professor He has everything from space shuttles to needles and thread. What else do you need? Even if you need something I can't afford it. Slap. Hijichu lightly slapped her open palms. Isn't it smart to think about it yourself? If you can't even think of this, I think you're a fool for having a smart face. He then turned to return to his suite. He left Gu Nianji standing alone in the hotel hallway. She stomped her feet at his clear and handsome back. At night, Hijichu called everyone for a meeting. He said he had just received a call from the prosecutor. They had found a new lawyer and the trial would continue the next day. The 4 assistants and Gu Nianji began preparing for the trial the next day. They divided up the work. One of them investigated the background of the defendant's new lawyer, and the other looked for cases he had fought in before. Gu Nianji was responsible for reenacting the case so that she could answer all kinds of questions from the opposing lawyer. It was just like in the arena. They wielded spears while the other side wielded shields. It was a competition to see if their spears were more powerful and could pierce through the other side's shield, or if the other side's shield was more powerful and could block their spears. Everyone discussed until midnight before returning to their rooms to sleep. Early the next morning, the 6 of them took a commercial car to the Munich District Court to participate in the trial. This time, the court they went to was different from the last time. Last time, the seats in the courtroom were like middle school desks, but this time the seats were thick and heavy black. They were placed on both sides of the room, adding to the sense of oppression. Gu Nianji walked in and saw the black courtroom seats. She couldn't help but breathe lightly. Everyone sat down on either side of the defendant or the plaintiff. The judge soon came in on time and announced that the court was in session. The plaintiff's prosecutor and the defendant's lawyer began to argue about the age of the two defendants. The male and female defendants were both burly and stood there like a wall. They looked more like they were in their 30s or 40s and not 22 as the defendant's lawyer had claimed. However, there were no problems with the defendants' birth certificates. At the time of the crime, they were indeed only 21 years old and not yet 22. According to German law, there was a qualitative leap from 21 to 22. German criminal law stipulated that suspects between 18 and 21 who had not reached the maturity level of an adult would be dealt with according to juvenile law and tried in juvenile court. Therefore, the main topic of discussion today was whether or not the two suspects had reached the maturity level of an adult. Gu Nianji was very annoyed when she saw this. These two B** stars looked like adults at first glance. What's more, they had committed a crime that only adults would commit. She didn't understand what was there to argue about. However, the defendant's lawyer obviously didn't think so. As long as his client was within the boundaries of adulthood, their sentences would be much lighter. Germany didn't have the death penalty for juvenile crimes. The most serious sentence was only 15 years in prison and could be released on bail after 2 years in prison. According to the male suspect, Seth's family background, he would probably be released after hanging around in prison. Gu Nianji was deeply dissatisfied. She clenched her fists and sat on the bench behind the plaintiff's seat. Her little face was tense. The defendant's lawyer was speaking eloquently. The latest scientific research has proven that whether or not a person has reached the maturity level of an adult can't be judged by age or appearance alone. Just like transgender people, the gender that they identify with in their hearts is their true gender. You can't say that a person is a woman just because they look like a woman and have female characteristics. Maybe deep down she thinks she's a man, so you have to respect her choice and say that she's a man. Gu Nianji's teeth were about to shatter when she heard this. Where did this weird lawyer come from? He was challenging everyone's common sense and worldview. Gu Nianji wasn't the only one who expressed her anger. Even the Germans listening to this kept gasping. If it weren't for the solemnity of the court, Gu Nianji guessed that there would have been people booing. However, the defendant's lawyer didn't care about everyone's reactions at all. He only cared about the judge. Your Honor, when the case occurred, my clients weren't even 22 years old. They were only 21 years old, and their mental behavior proves that they haven't reached the maturity level of an adult yet. I sincerely ask you to take this case back to the juvenile court to finish. Objection. The prosecutor immediately raised his right hand. The defendant's lawyer's standard for judging maturity is too subjective and not something that should be defined by the law. To determine whether or not the defendants meet the standard of adult maturity, it is enough to look at their physical and dental development. As the prosecutor spoke, he took out a medical test report and showed it to the court. This is a medical evaluation by a medical expert on the two defendants. From a physiological point of view, they are completely mature. Objection. The defendant's lawyer saw that the situation wasn't looking good and immediately jumped up. I said earlier that physical maturity alone isn't enough to determine true maturity. Only psychological maturity is true maturity. He quoted classics and even threw out the new theory of neuroscientists from Harvard University. The prosecutor was so angry that he couldn't speak. He was trying to stir up trouble. Gu Nianji couldn't stand it anymore. Psychological maturity, my asteriskes. Did you think the world revolved around you? Why didn't you argue that you had acute intermittent manic psychosis at the moment you killed someone? Gu Nianji suppressed her anger and stood up after obtaining He Jichu's approval. As a member of the legal team hired by the plaintiff's parents, Gu Nianji had the right to argue with the prosecutor against the defendant's lawyer. Your Honor, the latest research from Harvard University can't be used as a standard to determine whether or not the defendants are truly mature. Gu Nianji felt that the defendant's lawyer was quibbling and constantly changing concepts to brainwash everyone. Unfortunately, Gu Nianji was also an expert in changing concepts and brainwashing, so she didn't fall for it or become speechless from anger. Harvard University is the best university in the world, and Harvard's neuroscience is also one of the best. How dare you say that can't be used as a standard? The defendant's lawyer shrieked. He was still a bit wary of Gu Nianji. After all, the moment this little girl made a move, she forced the previous defendant's lawyer to go home and eat himself. It was said that even his lawyer's license might be revoked. This new defendant's lawyer had made ample preparations, but unfortunately, there was almost no information on Gu Nianji. He couldn't find anything else to analyze Gu Nianji's style of arguing in court. Gu Nianji walked out from the public gallery behind the plaintiff's stand and walked in front of the defendant's lawyer. In a clear voice she said, "American public schools allow transgender students to choose whether to use the men's or women's restroom. May I ask if it's the same in German public schools?" The defendant's lawyer shut his mouth tightly and refused to answer Gu Nianji's question. This question was obviously a trap. As soon as he answered, he would fall into the trap, and his previous defense would be completely ineffective. "Please answer me." Gu Nianji waited for a while, but when the defendant's lawyer still didn't speak, she urged him. "Your Honor, the defendant's lawyer isn't speaking. Shouldn't we get another lawyer for the other party?" Gu Nianji could only ask the judge for help. In court, the defendant's lawyer had to speak when questioned by the plaintiff's lawyer. The defendant had the right to remain silent, but the defendant's lawyer didn't. When the new defendant's lawyer heard that Gu Nianji was going to use the same trick again, he couldn't help but sneer. "What? Are you going to sue me for racial discrimination again?" "No, I'm not going to sue you for racial discrimination." Gu Nianji raised a brow. "I'm going to sue you for contempt of court." The defendant's lawyer glared at Gu Nianji as if he had just seen a dog. He opened his mouth and finally said angrily, "What the hell do you want to say?" "I'm asking you a question. Please answer me. Will German public schools recognize the rules for transgender students in American public schools?" Defendant's lawyer, "Please answer the plaintiff's lawyer's question." The judge finally spoke. The defendant's lawyer hung his head. After a long time he finally said, "No." Then he immediately said, "But this standard is different from Harvard University's standards for personal maturity." "It is different. Sir, I think you're trying to force a duck onto a perch by making this defense. You just found an argument, right?" Gu Nianji shrugged. "Actually, why do you have to go through all this trouble? A subject as advanced as neuromedicine isn't suitable for you, and it's even more unsuitable for your client who appears to be mentally retarded and crazy." This was the first update. There would be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 602. Objection. "The plaintiff's lawyer is slandering my client as mentally retarded and crazy. That's a personal attack." The defendant's lawyer immediately seized on the loophole in Gu Nianji's words and retorted excitedly. Gu Nianji smiled at him. "Are you sure I'm slandering your client? Is there a risk in telling the truth these days?" The defendant's lawyer boomed and almost patted his chest to guarantee, "My client is definitely not mentally retarded or crazy. On the contrary, he's very smart and rational. His school results can prove it, and his relatives and friends can also prove that he's always been a polite and good child." "Enough." Gu Nianji interrupted him. "That's what I want to know." As she spoke, she also turned to look at the judge. Her expression was so calm that no one could tell what she was going to do next. Hijichu curled his lips and secretly praised Gu Nianji's quick thinking in an emergency to block the opponent's escape route. The judge also froze and only confirmed with the defendant's lawyer after Gu Nianji's repeated urging. "Are you sure your client isn't mentally retarded or crazy?" "Absolutely not." The defendant's lawyer blurted out. Then he suddenly remembered something and his expression changed. Seth's stepfather York, who was sitting in the courtroom, cursed quietly, "Treacherous." Gu Nianji looked in the judge's direction, her pretty little face beaming from ear to ear. "Your Honor, the defendant's lawyer personally testified that the defendant is not mentally retarded, nor is he mentally ill. This means that he is a person with full capacity to act. Also, he was 21 when he committed the crime, and all his physical signs prove he's already an adult. Therefore, we object to using the juvenile court to try this case." The defendant's lawyer's face was ashen. He suddenly realized he was the one who was truly mentally retarded. Gu Nianji's words just now reminded him that defending the defendant as mentally retarded or mentally ill was the easiest way to get him off the hook. How could he ignore the essentials and let the other party lead him by the nose? In the end, this little b*tch had outsmarted him and personally cut off the possibility of a mentally retarded defense. The male defendant, Seth's parents, wanted to kill him with vicious glares. Therefore, the defendant's second defense, which they thought they were well prepared, lost another round because of Gu Nianji's interference. When the judge sighed and announced that the defendants would be tried as adults, Ramona, Seth's mother, immediately burst into tears. My baby. My baby." She threw herself at him and cried, hugging her son, who was as big and strong as a wall. The corners of Gu Nianji's mouth twitched as she muttered in Mandarin, "Let the baby go, it's still a child. Don't be so smug." The defense lawyer walked over and pointed to the sky, warning her in a threatening manner. There are still several rounds of trial left. Do you really think you have the upper hand? Look at where you are. How naive. Is too sin, right? Gu Nianji smiled as she packed her things. There was a hint of mockery in the corner of her mouth. I'll wait and see. You better work hard. Don't make me feel like I've won unfairly. You. The defense lawyer was so angry that he wanted to hit her. However, He Jichu and 4 other tall American lawyers surrounded him and looked at the defense lawyer coldly. The defense lawyer could only snort and leave. Show him some color and he'll start a dye shop. Gu Nianji wasn't afraid at all, but when she turned around she saw the male defendant, Seth, glaring at her. It made her very unhappy. What are you looking at? If it weren't for the fact that Germany doesn't have the death penalty, you'd be dead for sure. Gu Nianji secretly complained in her heart, but she put on a shocked expression and immediately said to the bailiff, Sir, I'm afraid that person will take revenge on me. I want to ask for court protection. Gu Nianji pointed in the direction of the male defendant, Seth, who didn't have time to retract his hateful gaze. Everyone in the courtroom, including the judge and the bailiff, saw it. He could have been released on bail, but seeing his fierce expression, the judge flatly rejected his family's request for bail. The reason was that he had threatened the plaintiff's lawyer, which was an additional crime, so he couldn't be released on bail. Ramona, Seth's mother, covered her mouth tightly with her hand. Her eyes were red from crying as she watched her son be taken away by the bailiff and locked up. She walked to Gu Nianji and sobbed. You're so cruel. My son didn't do it on purpose, so why did you have to be so ruthless? What's your relationship with the victim? How much money did her family pay you for you working so hard for her lawsuit? Gu Nianji rolled her eyes internally. This kind of person did whatever they wanted just because they had a bit of power. Truly, everything was the same in the past and present. My client was even more innocent. May I ask why your son tortured her to death? Your son killed an innocent person, so how dare you ask others to let your son go? Just because you're a high-ranking officer in the German police force? Gu Nianji spoke loudly, her authentic Oxford English clearly heard by the German media waiting at the door. They practically pricked up their ears to listen to the commotion. Ramona's heart ached to death. To her, the dead Wuxia female exchange student was less than a dog. She would sympathize with a dead dog, but the person who died was a foreigner with no power or influence. She really didn't think her precious son would have to pay such a high price for such a small matter. Do you know that my son is only 22 years old? If he goes to jail, his life will be ruined. What chance will he have in the future? Ramona angrily accused Gu Nianji. And there's no evidence at all. What right do you have to say that my son killed your client? No evidence at all? Gu Nianji snorted. How do you know there's no evidence at all? Of course I know. My husband and I personally investigated this case. Ramona wiped the tears from her face, and a vicious glint flashed across her eyes. As a woman, she had risen to the position of senior inspector not entirely because of her husband's connections. Gu Nianji hated this kind of person the most. She sneered. There's no evidence at all because you and your husband destroyed all the evidence, right? Nonsense. Ramona took 2 steps back, her expression a bit panicked. There was no evidence to begin with. My son didn't kill her. With that, she hurriedly left the courtroom and refused all media interviews. Gu Nianji put on her large sunglasses and followed He Jichu out of the courthouse. There were even more media waiting at the courthouse, and when they saw them come out, they swarmed over even more. Microphones with recording equipment were handed to He Jichu. He also wore a large pair of sunglasses, which made his face look even more exquisite and mysterious. This was the second watch. A reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. P.S. Thank you all for your support. Thank you to the readers who discovered the plagiarized book. It feels so heartwarming. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 603. He Jichu didn't say a word and didn't look at the reporters chasing after him. He walked to his luxurious business car as if there was no one else around. The reporters who had been squeezing in front of him were mesmerized by his aura and couldn't help parting to make a path for him. They watched as the 6-person legal team from the largest American law firm filed out and got into their car. After the car sped away, the reporters finally snapped back to reality and began frantically broadcasting the results of the day's trial. Unfortunately, audio and video recordings weren't allowed in the courtroom, so they could only use a few photos of the official trial issued by the court to accompany the news. By the time Gu Nianji and the others returned to the hotel, the German media was already reporting on the second trial of the case. Gu Nianji and the 4 American assistants watched TV in Hijichu's hotel suite and discussed the case at the same time. Watching Hijichu's handsome back as he strode to his business car, Gu Nianji sat on the sofa and cupped her cheeks as she smiled. Professor, he is famous in Germany now. Hijichu was indeed famous in Germany, but the Germans paid more attention to the largest American law firm behind Hijichu. Law firms usually didn't advertise publicly, so Hijichu being in the limelight this time could be considered a free large-scale advertisement for his law firm. The law firm originally had branches in Europe, but they were in England and France, not Germany. After the case appeared, the Germans became very familiar with the law firm, and the Americans who knew how to do business immediately decided to open a branch in Germany. Because Hijichu was a partner of the law firm and a symbolic figure for the Germans to familiarize themselves with the law firm, he was also appointed to preside over the opening of the German branch. Hijichu didn't need to do much of the trivial work. He only needed to oversee the general direction and sign important legal documents. As for the case they were trying, Hijichu made Gu Nianji the team leader, and the other 4 assistants became her subordinates. After the previous 2 trials, the 4 American assistants were impressed by Gu Nianji's abilities. Also, because the case involved a female student from the Wuxia Empire and was of the same language and ethnicity as Gu Nianji, it would be more sincere for her to be the main representative. It would also arouse the sympathy of the judge and the German public, so they unanimously supported Gu Nianji as the leader to win the case. When the Germans saw her, they would think of the pitiful and innocent victim who had died, and they could gain more sympathy. Although the law had its own logic, public pressure was also very important. It was impossible for a judge not to pay attention to public opinion because a judge was also a human. To the 4 American assistants, as long as they won the lawsuit, they would receive the same benefits as Gu Nianji. Because in theory they were all Hijichu's assistants, so Hijichu was the main person in charge. Gu Nianji was the leader of the team, but it was a different division of responsibilities within the team. It wouldn't affect their future resumes. Therefore, with everyone's support, Gu Nianji became the main force against the defense's lawyer in the trial. When she appeared in court the next day, Gu Nianji had tied her long hair into a bun at the back of her head and put on some light makeup. She looked more mature than when she wasn't wearing makeup, and her movements were full of confidence. She no longer looked like a young college girl. She stood next to Hijichu, her cold expression almost identical to his. "I can tell that you're Mr. He's student." One of the assistants teased her. "Gu, you're such a good learner. You can even imitate Mr. He's expression perfectly." Gu Nianji touched her face and smiled. "Smith, you have bad eyesight. You said I look like him. Are you saying I'm not a woman, or that Professor he isn't a man?" The assistant named Smith froze for a moment before understanding. He was instantly defeated by Gu Nianji's incisiveness. His face ashened, he quickly glanced at Hijichu. He didn't expect Hijichu to be looking at them with a cold expression. "Oh my God. Gu, you've really screwed me over. Can't I just make a joke?" Smith moved closer to Gu Nianji and pointed at her with gritted teeth. Hijichu's expression darkened. He finally said, "Smith, you don't have to appear in court today. Go see how the branch is progressing and report to me tonight." He kicked Smith out of the trial with one sentence. Smith wanted to cry but had no tears. He knew he had gotten into trouble by talking too much. He could only pack his briefcase dejectedly and leave the Munich district court. He went to check on the progress of the new German branch. How could such a boring task compare to the excitement of a trial? He wasn't wrong. Today's trial was indeed exciting. This was the 3rd trial. After 2 trials where the defendant changed lawyers and whether or not the defendant was judged as an adult, Gu Nianji and the prosecutor worked together to not only greatly reduce the opponent's arrogance, but they also conveniently blocked the loophole of the opponent's mentally retarded defense. Today, the 3rd trial was about to enter the main topic of the case. However, they didn't know until they entered the courtroom that there was a new judge. The new judge was of a higher rank than the previous judge. His attitude toward the case was also very different from the previous judge. The male defendant, Seth, had a cold expression. His eyes were cold as he glared at Gu Nianji. When faced with the prosecutor's question, his new defense lawyer denied it flatly. "My client didn't see the victim on the day she died. My client met her the day before she died and had sex with her the day before." Gu Nianji couldn't help but sneer at this ridiculous answer. Although the male defendant, Seth, tried his best to appear innocent, his murky eyes betrayed his evil heart. The prosecutor confirmed again and again that the defendant's lawyer insisted that his client was innocent and that someone else had killed the victim, Li Haiqin. The prosecutor pursed his lips. He looked at the materials in his hands, then at the judge who was staring at him coldly. He also looked at the high-ranking police officers behind the defendant's stand. He was a bit discouraged. This case wasn't difficult at all. What was difficult was who had the guts to stand up against the entire police district and the judicial system for an ordinary, powerless foreigner. The police officer who had previously performed the DNA test had already been charged by the prosecutor due to procedural issues because he had foiled the plans of some high-ranking police officers and couldn't get their children off the hook. Gu Nianji watched as the prosecutor didn't refute the defendant's lawyer's ridiculous answer for a long time. He actually shriveled up and was puzzled. This case wasn't difficult. Based on the materials she had seen, it was obvious that the defendant and his lawyer were lying. Why didn't the prosecutor fight back? After a while, the relieved judge announced a 15-minute recess. After 15 minutes, if the prosecutor and the victim's lawyer didn't have new evidence, a preliminary verdict would be made. In that case, the defendant was likely to be acquitted due to lack of evidence. Gu Nianji didn't understand. She straightened up and asked Yijichu quietly, "Professor He, what's going on?" Yijichu knew more about things beyond the law than Gu Nianji. He said coldly, "These people should have already taken control of the entire judicial system. The prosecutor doesn't dare to argue with them anymore." Gu Nianji's eyes widened in shock. There wasn't a trace of impurity in her clear black and white eyes. She asked blankly, "Why? How dare they?" This was a matter of life and death. A foreigner. Why wouldn't they dare? They even dare to do it to their own people. It's just that the cost is higher. The corners of Hijichu's mouth twitched. But this time they've kicked an iron plate. Gu Nianji took a deep breath and patted her chest. "Thank you for your support, Professor He. I'll go ask the prosecutor and then let me do it." Hijichu looked at her quietly for a while. "Aren't you afraid?" "Afraid? Why should I be afraid of these sneaky people? I believe that evil can't prevail over good. I don't believe that they can really hide the truth from the masses. I believe that heaven's net has long arms but nothing escapes. You'll have to pay for what you've done sooner or later. Okay, then go ahead and try." Hijichu looked down. The key to this case is the transactions behind the scenes. The evidence in front of the courtroom is actually very sufficient, but the collusion within the judicial system here is too rampant. Gu Nianji only said one word before getting up to look for the prosecutor. In just a short while, the prosecutor was almost nowhere to be seen. Gu Nianji asked several people before finding him on the rooftop of the courthouse. Seeing his lonely figure standing on the rooftop, Gu Nianji suddenly understood what Hijichu was saying. This prosecutor must be under a lot of pressure, right? He was afraid that after the case was over, he would be attacked and retaliated from within the system, right? After all, the murderer was the son of the head of their department. He didn't have the sharpness of the previous 2 times. He was almost completely subdued in front of the defense lawyer and didn't dare to argue with him. Gu Nianji didn't want to ask him why. He had already tried his best. Why make things difficult for him? Gu Nianji had never been someone who would let others sacrifice themselves for her or others' benefit. She walked over slowly and coughed softly. The prosecutor turned around and saw it was Gu Nianji. He forced a smile at her and said quietly, "I'm sorry." Gu Nianji's eyes were a little wet. She raised her head and took a deep breath to swallow her tears. She said in a low voice, "If you don't mind, can you give me your information? I'll be the chief control officer later." "Are you sure?" The prosecutor gasped. "You're still young. I understand how you feel. When I was as young as you, I also had a strong sense of justice. But I'm already 50 years old this year and will soon be retiring. If I give it my all, I might lose my qualifications for public office forever, my pension, and spend the rest of my life in poverty." It was indeed the reason Hijichu had mentioned. This is the first update. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. There will be an extra update at 7 p.m. P.S. Happy Queen's Day, girls. Chapter 604. As Gu Nianji lamented her lack of experience, she felt more respect for Hijichu. She said to the prosecutor, "I understand and I don't blame you. I just hope you can give me the information. It's not illegal and I'm also the victim's lawyer. I have the right to share the information with you." Although the prosecutor was afraid of retaliation from those people, he also had his own sense of justice. The psychological pressure of not being able to redress the grievances of the poor victim was no less than that of being threatened. Seeing that Gu Nianji only requested to share the information and that it was legally permitted, he agreed without hesitation. "I'll give it to you when we get back to court." He patted Gu Nianji's shoulder. Work hard. The last chance is in your hands. Gunyenji was very grateful. She followed the prosecutor back to the court and took a flash drive from him. The information is all here, but it's all in German. You can use real-time software to translate it into English immediately. Although it's not very accurate, the general meaning shouldn't be wrong. The prosecutor secretly suggested to her. Gunyenji agreed with a smile and returned to her seat. She passed the flash drive to Hijichu. Professor He, this is the German information. Can you take a look? Hijichu took the flash drive and inserted it into the computer port to start browsing. There was a lot of information and the prosecutor sorted out the key points. Hijichu quickly translated the summary of the case into English and summarized a few contradictions and suspicious points for Gunyenji's reference. Gunyenji also opened her laptop and silently connected to the Munich District Court's free Wi-Fi. Since the Munich and Roslau judicial systems were blatantly colluding with each other to obstruct justice, they couldn't blame her for taking drastic measures. She knew it was illegal to a certain extent. At least, it violated the court's rule that trials were not to be held in public. However, this violation had nothing to do with the case. Even if it was discovered in the end, it wouldn't affect the trial. Gunyenji pursed her lips, her gaze determined. Her slender fingers flew across the laptop and opened a small software that she made. Using a heavily disguised IP address, she hacked into the court's central control system and connected to the court's video surveillance. At the same time, she shared the video surveillance with the court's official account on Germany's largest social media to broadcast the entire trial. In order to make the Germans realize how evil their elected judge and police chief were, Gunyenji intentionally adjusted the angle of the surveillance cameras in the courtroom. The main part of the courtroom focused on the judge, the defendant's lawyer, and the male defendant, Seth. In the public gallery, it focused on Seth's stepfather, York, and mother, Ramona. She carefully left an angle in the courtroom that would not be captured by the cameras. When the time came, she would stand at this angle and take charge. Only her voice could be heard on the shared live stream, but her figure could not be seen. Soon, a live stream of the trial appeared on the official account of the Munich District Court. The Germans who were following the case were keenly aware of it. For a while, there was a surge of public sentiment on social media, and the server was almost overcrowded. The court's official social media account wasn't very active and didn't have many followers. This time, because of this famous case, they only gained a few followers. Therefore, the court didn't send anyone to manage the social media account. Only a part-time court clerk went there once a month. Therefore, when people discovered the live stream of the trial, the social media account gained 1,000 followers a second, but the Munich District Court didn't know anything about it. 15 minutes passed and the smiling judge announced the start of the trial. He said eagerly, "If the defendant's lawyer and the plaintiff's lawyer have no further questions, I can announce." "Wait." Gunyenji stood up and said calmly, "I have a question." The judge's expression darkened inch by inch. He stared at Gunyenji. "What did you say? Please speak German." As expected, he was deliberately making things difficult. Gunyenji raised a brow. No wonder the previous two trial judges who sympathized with the victim had been replaced. It turned out they had replaced a judge who was biased towards the defendant. Gunyenji raised her voice and said in English, "According to your law, I can defend in English. Your court will have to assign an interpreter for me." "We don't have an interpreter here." The judge spread his hands with a sullen expression. "You can either speak German or shut up and let me announce the outcome of the trial." When the judge said this, the court's official social media account exploded with the live stream of the trial. Countless Germans who were watching the live broadcast of the court trial felt as if 10,000 beasts were galloping in their hearts. How could this be? Wasn't this clearly not allowing the prosecution's lawyer to speak? Although German was supposed to be spoken in German courts, there was no rule against English. You're saying you can't find an interpreter? Fine. At the same time, countless Germans with professional translation qualifications called the court and volunteered to be the German interpreter for the lawyer representing the victim, Li Haiqing's parents. The court staff quickly asked the judge who was in the middle of the trial if they needed an interpreter. The judge looked at them coldly and didn't dare ask a word. The judge continued to say to Gunyenji, "Nothing else to say? Fine, I announce." "Wait." This time it was Hijichu who stood up and spoke in German. "I'll be her German interpreter." His pure Hanover accent surprised the judge. The tens of thousands of Germans watching the live stream finally laughed. This was the first time they found themselves choosing to stand on the side of a foreigner in a conflict between a native and a foreigner. Gunyenji looked at Hijichu gratefully and immediately began her questioning. She first looked at the male defendant, Seth. Mr. Seth, I want to ask you. Your lawyer said that you met the victim the day before she died and had sex with her. Is that true? Seth narrowed his eyes at her and still didn't speak. Gunyenji turned to the defense lawyer. May I ask if you have full authority to speak for your client, Seth? Is that correct? Of course I'm his lawyer. Don't tell me you don't even know what it means to be a lawyer who signed a contract? The defense lawyer mocked Gunyenji with an unfriendly look. Yeah, it's good that you know. Gunyenji looked at the male defendant, Seth. Mr. Seth, did you hear that? Everything your defense lawyer says later is on your behalf and has the full force of law. Gunyenji saw the confusion on Seth's shiny face and coughed lightly before continuing to explain. So, you still plan on not saying a word? He's not you. Is his understanding of the case and yourself as profound as yours? It was the second watch. Just a reminder, there were recommendation votes and monthly votes. What? Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 605. Deal with the chief prosecutor himself? Don't want a defense lawyer? Seth's heart skipped a beat, and he shifted uneasily in his seat. He instinctively looked at his parents in the gallery behind him. His stepfather York kept a straight face and slowly shook his head at him. Of course he couldn't let him defend himself. He knew his stepson's personality very well. Gunyenji saw all of this and curled her lips into a small smile. She looked like she could deal with him easily. She understood Seth's personality and behavior. From the information, he was a selfish, narrow-minded, extreme and impulsive person. He didn't have a high IQ and his judgment was poor. However, he was strangely conceited and didn't trust anyone but himself. Otherwise, she wouldn't have set up such a trap to expose Seth's shortcomings in front of all of Germany and even the entire world. So she continued to say to Seth, "Are you asking for the opinion of your stepfather, who is also the chief of the Roslau Regional Police Department? I still have to remind you that no matter what, you can't not say a word. If that's the case, why don't you answer the plaintiff's lawyer's questions yourself?" Seth wavered. He was indeed afraid of people saying the wrong thing. Although his parents said the new lawyer was very good and famous for being a rogue lawyer, what if he said the wrong thing? Also, he had said the wrong thing before. His mother had told him that it would be best to use mental illness to get him off the hook, but the lawyer had ruined it. Famous? That was all there was to it. He didn't want a criminal record, and he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in jail. Just as Seth was hesitating, Gunyenji said to the judge, "According to procedure, it is now our turn to cross-examine the defendant. Your Honor, please allow it." The judge glared at Gunyenji and almost said, "No." But he remembered that there were people from the media sitting in the courtroom. Although York said he had already informed his friends from the media, he couldn't be too obvious. What if those people wrote nonsense? It was better to go through the necessary procedures first since it wouldn't affect his verdict. He nodded. "Defendant, please answer the plaintiff's lawyer's questions." The judge gave the order, so Seth had no choice but to go to the seat in front for questioning witnesses and suspects. Gunyenji clasped her hands behind her back and stood gracefully in the courtroom. Her small, bright face was like fine white jade, exquisite and moving. Seth glanced at Gunyenji and suddenly remembered the Wuxia female exchange student he had tortured to death multiple times. She also had a slender body, but she wasn't as pretty as this lawyer, and her skin wasn't as fair as hers. That kind of crystal-clear skin would definitely feel good to the touch. Just thinking about it made him hard. Seth's eyes were fixed on Gunyenji's chest. Gunyenji's women's Armani suit was very slim, accentuating her slim waist and accentuating her breasts. Seth's face was extremely annoying and Gunyenji was very angry. However, she knew that it was a live broadcast of the trial, and the more perverted Seth appeared, the easier it would be for him to attract hatred. So she ignored Seth's gaze and calmly began to ask her questions. "Mr. Seth, may I ask where you were on the evening of May 11th a year ago, when the victim, Li Haichin, went out for a jog and was attacked?" "I was sleeping in my apartment with my girlfriend, Nina." Seth's lips curled into a perverted smile as he looked at Nina, who was also the defendant's girlfriend. Nina bowed her head deeply and bent over so much that she was about to crawl under the table. Gunyenji calmly continued her interrogation. "Other than your girlfriend, is there anyone else who can testify?" Seth thought about it for a minute and shook his head. "Oh, that's too bad." Gunyenji raised her finger and shook it. "Your girlfriend is also the defendant in this case, so using her as your alibi has no legal effect at all." Seth's expression darkened, and a trace of anger appeared on his originally calm face. "Why?" Seth asked Gunyenji with gritted teeth. Although I have no obligation to answer your questions, I can explain to you since you have always despised the law and order, so you don't continue to be ignorant of the law. Gu Nianji paused, and before the defense lawyer could object, she quickly said, because she could collude with you to cover up for each other's crimes. The defense lawyer was still a beat too slow and finally shouted, "Objection! The plaintiff's lawyer is slandering my client." Objection sustained. Plaintiff's lawyer, please be careful with your words. The judge immediately warned Gu Nianji, and his biased expression was obvious. Gu Nianji shrugged. Your Honor, although I don't think it's slandering to say that the defendant is ignorant of the law, I can't help it if you insist on protecting the defendant's interests. How is it not slandering? The defense lawyer sneered and waved his arm fiercely. His body language showed that he was very agitated and angry, and this situation was very infectious for the court personnel. This isn't the first time you've said this. You said my client is mentally retarded and crazy. Now you're saying he's ignorant of the law. I'm sorry to say he's mentally retarded and crazy, but being ignorant of the law is the truth. Gu Nianji didn't care and continued, Defendant's lawyer, have you forgotten the definition of slandering? I can't sue you for slandering just because you quarrel with me. The defense lawyer was speechless. I'm the one suing you. How can it be you suing me? Gu Nianji spun around and looked at the people in the courtroom. The three elements to prove slandering are slandering, accusing the plaintiff, and publication. Even if the first two are true, the third one is not. As long as I didn't officially publish your client's statement that he's mentally retarded and crazy, slandering cannot be established and can't even be filed. As for being ignorant of the law, according to the basic principle of slandering, it must be a fiction. If it's an objective fact, then even if it causes harm to your client, it can't be considered slandering. Your client is ignorant of the law, and this is an objective fact, so I'm sorry to hurt his and your fragile pride, but I won't take back my words. You're being unreasonable. The defense lawyer sneered. It's not a slandering lawsuit, so why are you talking about all this nonsense? How do you know it's not a slandering lawsuit? Then who was the one who said I was slandering his client? Gu Nianji raised a brow and glanced at Seth. Even your client is better at talking than you are. The defense lawyer was also capable, but he had no conscience, so he was the only one who dared to take on this kind of lawsuit where the defendant had conclusive evidence. He relied on Seth's parents' influence to handle it casually because the outcome of the trial had already been communicated behind the scenes. He hadn't expected to run into a small lawyer who didn't fear power and kept going against them. The defense lawyer narrowed his eyes and thought to himself that he had to teach her a lesson. Otherwise, losing face was a small matter, but if he lost the case, he couldn't afford to offend Seth's parents. The judge's eyes narrowed at Gu Nianji's words. He wanted to refute her, but when he thought about the verdict he was about to make, he restrained himself. He looked down at the summary statement in front of him and pretended not to hear Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji smiled and turned to ask the male defendant, Seth, again. So on the evening of May 11th last year, what were you and your girlfriend doing? Seth shut his mouth and refused to say anything else. It won't do if you don't speak. If you don't speak, I'll assume you have no alibi that day, Gu Nianji said calmly. She took out a document and said loudly to the people in the courtroom, "This is Mr. Seth's statement when he turned himself in to the police." Seth froze. Gu Nianji took the statement and asked him, "Is this your signature?" Seth looked at it and nodded. "Yes." "You said in the statement that you saw the victim, Li Haiqing, on May 10th, the day before she died, and that you had sex with her. It wasn't the day she was attacked and died of an unnatural cause?" "Yes, it was the day before. We had sex." A strange smile appeared on Seth's face. He looked at Gu Nianji and his fingers trembled. Gu Nianji's expression turned serious as she took out a forensic report. "Mr. Seth, since you said you had sex with the victim the day before, why was there still your *** on her body and clothes when she died? Even if you didn't shower for a night and there were traces on your body, who would wear clothes full of *** and go jogging in the same clothes the next day?" He had overlooked this point. Seth's eyes flickered as he stammered. "Who knows? Maybe it was her eccentricity." "Eccentricity, my ass. Are you stupid, or do you think we're all stupid?" Gu Nianji felt that his excuse was ridiculous and insulting everyone's intelligence. Objection. The plaintiff's lawyer is insulting my client again and making a personal attack. The defendant's lawyer stood up and glared at Gu Nianji. The judge was expressionless and said to Gu Nianji, "Plaintiff's lawyer, please watch your words. This is the third time." Gu Nianji chuckled and spread her hands. "Your Honor, I was making a reasonable inference." Of course, if you and the defendant's lawyer believe that a reasonable inference is not allowed, then what's the point of us arguing so hard? The judge hung his head uncomfortably and laughed dryly. As long as it's a reasonable inference, of course it's allowed. Then I inferred from the defendant's ridiculous words that he thinks we're stupid. Is that not allowed? Or do you and the defendant's lawyer think it's normal to go jogging in clothes full of **** the next day? The defendant's lawyer and the judge both shut up. Ijichu continued to translate for her from the side. His cool and emotionless voice complemented Gunyenji's forceful debate and was surprisingly effective. At least the countless Germans watching the live broadcast of the trial were completely convinced. Gunyenji picked up another document and said, "The victim, Li Haiqing, disappeared on the evening of May 11th last year when she went jogging. Later, her roommate called the police and 2 days later, her naked body was found in the woods behind Seth's building. Her clothes were only found after the police rummaged through 50 tons of trash." This was the first update. A reminder to everyone for your monthly votes and recommendation votes. There would be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 606. After the police filed the case, the police officer who did the DNA testing was sued by the local prosecutor's office because he announced to the media that the defendant's DNA was found on the clothes and the victim's body. They said that he violated procedural justice by announcing the DNA results ahead of time. And everyone should remember that when the case was first filed and the defendant had just turned himself in, there was another prosecutor who used the defendant's side of the story and violated professional ethics and judicial principles. He immediately held a press conference to say that the victim had initiated a threesome with the defendant and had suffocated to death after going too far. I can also let everyone know that the prosecutor who held a press conference to say that the victim was a willing threesome was not sued by the prosecutor's office for violating procedural justice. Instead, he was promoted. One announced the truth and became a defendant, while the other falsified information and was promoted. How harmonious. Of these two people, one released correct information to the public, but was accused of violating procedural justice. The other released false information and intentionally misled the public, but was promoted and made a fortune. What does this mean? Gunyenji's gaze fell on Seth's parents sitting in the courtroom. This means that this originally simple case was obstructed by internal police and became what it is today. Objection. The defendant's lawyer was furious and waved his fist at Gunyenji. You have no evidence to say that the police obstructed internal police. Your accusation is very serious, I'm telling you. I don't need you to tell me. Gunyenji calmly took out the information that the prosecutor had given her. According to the police department's own records, the day before Seth turned himself in, his parents drove to his residence to clean up, and took away more than 10 bags of trash. At the time, the building that Seth lived in had already been designated as a key inspection area by the police department, and nothing was allowed to be moved. However, Seth's parents used their privileges to openly enter and interfere with the handling of evidence. Can I reasonably infer that the defendant's parents had already removed and destroyed all direct evidence? All of this was written on the flash drive that the prosecutor had given Gunyenji. In for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound, Gunyenji spilled the beans. Ijichu was impartial and translated it all into German for her. The Germans watching the live broadcast of the trial were in an uproar. What? There's such a thing? That's too evil. Not only were the people in the courtroom stunned, but all the Germans watching the live broadcast were also stunned. Many of them were locals of the Roslau region and knew that the local government was very shady. However, this level of shoddiness was still beyond what most people could accept. They all knew that there was a problem with their legal system, but they didn't expect it to be this big. This kind of unscrupulous trampling of justice actually happened inside their courts and police stations. What justice was there to speak of? The defense lawyer didn't expect Gunyenji to be so daring. His face was stern as he repeatedly objected and kept saying that what Gunyenji said had nothing to do with the case. The judge panicked a little and hurriedly said, "Plaintiff's lawyer, don't say anything unrelated to the case. If you continue, I'll disqualify you as a lawyer." Gunyenji laughed coldly. "Your Honor, I originally thought that you had ill intentions towards us. It was just my imagination. Now I realize that it really wasn't an illusion. You mean us harm. How can a judge who has ill intentions towards us conduct a fair trial? Also, I obtained my lawyer's license from the United States and the Wuxia Empire, not Germany. You have no right to disqualify me." The judge froze and scowled. He finally realized that Gunyenji wasn't a local lawyer but a lawyer from a major American law firm. His heart pounded. He didn't expect the plaintiff's lawyer to also know about this. If this continued, it would be even more difficult for him to insist that the defendant was not guilty. However, Seth's stepfather, York, was not only the chief of the local police station, but also a member of the Roslaw City Council and the leader of the local Democratic Party. This kind of power wasn't something a district judge like him could shake. Also, they had promised him benefits. After this case was over, York would use his party's power to support him in running for office. On one side was a bright future, and on the other was an insignificant case of a foreign female student's death. The judge didn't even need to think about which side to tilt the scales. The judge pursed his lips and stared at Gunyenji. He frowned and thought for a while. Since there was no direct evidence, he didn't care how glib Gunyenji was. When the time came, he just had to grit his teeth and would rather let a real criminal go than convict him without direct evidence. Seeing the judge's nonchalant expression, Gunyenji knew that these people must have already reached an agreement in private. Today's trial was just a formality. She couldn't help but sneer. Trying to manipulate the case? Dream on. The judge slammed his gavel on the table to warn Gunyenji. Plaintiff's lawyer, don't change the subject. May I ask if you have any more direct evidence? If not, we'll have to conclude our statement. He repeatedly emphasized that there was no need to talk about reasoning. Courts were all about evidence, and without evidence, especially direct evidence, reasoning was useless. Gunyenji was now completely certain that the judge was in cahoots with the defendant's parents. She finally understood the helplessness of the prosecutor who had just stepped down. He truly didn't dare go against them. Even if he had the most direct evidence, he didn't dare take it out in court. Or rather, he didn't dare take it out. In that instant, Gunyenji decided to treat the evidence as if she had collected it herself and let the kind prosecutor off the hook. She wasn't German anyway, so she wasn't afraid of scum like York taking revenge. If they wanted to reach into the Wuxia Empire or the United States to take revenge on her, Huoxiao and Professor he would teach them a lesson. Gunyenji's anxious and restless heart completely calmed down when she thought of that. She turned around to look at Hijichu. Hijichu understood what she meant and nodded at her to let her do it. Gunyenji closed her eyes and turned to the judge resolutely. Your Honor, I have direct evidence to prove that Seth's parents obstructed and interfered with justice. I also have direct evidence to prove that Seth and his girlfriend lied. They met the victim, Li Haiqing, a few hours before she was murdered, and not the day before as they claimed. The judge's mouth fell open, and his gaze involuntarily shot to York, who was sitting behind the defendant's stand. York was Seth's stepfather and the most powerful person in the Roslaw area. His heart also skipped a beat. He had already packed everything that needed to be packed, so how could there still be direct evidence? It was the second watch. A reminder, recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 607. The direct evidence Gunyenji had obtained from the prosecutor was the surveillance footage of an antique store across the street from Seth's apartment. The evidence was so important that the righteous officers in the Roslaw Police Department had a tacit understanding and didn't mention it to their superiors, York and Ramona. That was why they didn't know about the existence of the evidence until now. The surveillance footage was originally used by the antique store to protect its own store, but it happened to include the area in front of the apartment building across the street. Seth's head jerked up and he looked at Gunyenji in horror. Gradually, a cruel glint flashed across his eyes as he slowly lowered his head and licked his dry lips with his scarlet tongue. The judge and the defendant's stepfather York felt their hearts sink. When did they get this evidence? How did they not know about it? The defendant's lawyer paled but immediately stood up to ask, "May I ask where the plaintiff's lawyer obtained this evidence? Why wasn't it reported to the court before?" Gunyenji had already saved the surveillance footage onto her laptop from the flash drive the prosecutor had given her. She had also uploaded it to the Wuxia Empire's cloud backup, so she wasn't afraid of anyone deleting it. She replied calmly, "Of course it was the surveillance footage from the antique store. What else do you think? As for why it wasn't reported, we only just obtained this footage." The defendant's lawyer was bewildered and couldn't help turning to look at York. York nodded at him expressionlessly. The defendant's lawyer had an idea and said to Gunyenji, "What surveillance footage? We have to show it to the court to know if it's real or fake. If it's a fake, then let's play it in court." Gunyenji generously raised her laptop. "If the court doesn't have the equipment to play it, I can use my laptop to show it to you." How could the court not have the equipment to play it? The judge looked at Gunyenji for a while before saying, "You can connect it to the big screen in court." Gun Yenji and the court staff connected their computers to the big screen in court. Soon, the scene in front of Seth's apartment building appeared on the big screen. The footage showed the time of May 11th last year at around 5 in the afternoon, which was when the victim, Li Haiqing, disappeared. The female defendant, Nina, let out a low howl and collapsed on the table to cry. Her image appeared on the surveillance camera. She walked out of Seth's apartment building and circled the door a few times. At that moment, a petite and pretty Chinese female exchange student jogged over in beige sportswear and entered the range of the surveillance camera. It was the victim, Li Haiqing. Nina quickly walked over and called out to Li Haiqing. Li Haiqing stopped and the two of them seemed to be talking about something. Then Nina practically pulled Li Haiqing's arm into Seth's apartment. Gun Yenji pressed the pause button and didn't ask the male defendant Seth. Instead, she asked the female defendant Nina, "Nina, were you with Seth on May 11th last year?" Nina nodded expressionlessly. The evidence was conclusive and she could not hold on any longer. May 11th last year, the day Li Haiqing was killed. Why did you stop her? Before Nina could answer, Seth suddenly yelled, "She volunteered to have a threesome with us. You're meddling too much." Gun Yenji wasn't angry. She replied with an "oh," and asked Seth in return, "Then which day was it voluntary? Do you want to think about it again? Was it the 10th or the 11th? Seth's eyes were bloodshot as he glared at Gun Yenji, unable to speak for a long time. "You're not going to say anything? This surveillance camera isn't fake, right? The day you saw the victim, Li Haiqing, was clearly May 11th. Gun Yenji pointed at the temporary image on the big screen. Seth was still stubborn and said, "What's the difference between the 10th and the 11th? Can I remember wrongly? She volunteered anyway. We didn't force her. Also, she was clearly fine when she left. Who knows what happened after that?" Gun Yenji nodded. "Okay, the first point of doubt is that you did indeed see the victim on the day of her death. This proves that you were lying before." I remembered wrongly. How is that a lie?" Seth almost roared. Gun Yenji glanced at him coldly and turned to look at the judge. "The defendant is shouting in court, and Your Honor is not going to do anything?" Only then did the judge reluctantly say to Seth, "Defendant, please control your emotions. I will not allow you to frame a good person." "Yes, we will never let a bad person go." Gun Yenji followed up and almost made Seth jump again. The defense lawyer quickly came over to calm him down, but he still glared at Gun Yenji with hatred. Gun Yenji wasn't afraid of him at all and said, "You said she willingly had sex with you and then left. But I went through the surveillance footage of this antique shop from that day until now, and I didn't see any images of Li Haiqing leaving your house. May I ask how she left your house? Did she fly out? Or did she jump out of your window?" Seth panicked and quickly said, "She jumped out. She jumped out of her own accord." Li Haiqing's body was found in the woods behind Seth's apartment building, facing the back window of Seth's house. "Ah, you live on the 3rd floor. Did she jump from the 3rd floor? That's amazing." Gun Yenji said meaningfully and opened the video again. She said to Seth's parents sitting in the courtroom, "And you too, I'll ask you again. Did you go to Seth's house to help him destroy the evidence? Oh no, I should say clean up." Seth's stepfather, York, was livid and his hands began to tremble. Gun Yenji quietly looked at York, the male defendant's stepfather. She didn't speak or retreat. This person was the root cause of the difficulty of the entire case. He had absolute power in the area where the crime occurred, and in the words of the Wuxia imperial bureaucracy, he was the head of the local public security, prosecution, and justice department. He was also the leader of the local Democratic Party and a representative of the People's Congress. This man was quite hard-working for his stepson. Gun Yenji secretly cursed him. If Seth was his biological son, he would probably have forcefully closed the case long ago. York also looked at Gun Yenji and in that instant he actually calmed down. This female lawyer looked quite brave, probably because she was a foreigner and thought he couldn't do anything to her. That was why she dared to speak and do what she wanted. The corners of York's mouth twitched. He looked down and looked away, no longer meeting Gun Yenji's gaze. Gun Yenji smiled faintly and focused her attention on the female defendant, Nina. She could tell that Nina was about to break down. She was the only way to get the entire truth of the case. Gun Yenji walked to her and began to ask, "Nina, what did you say to the victim, Li Haiqing, that day that made her follow you into the apartment? Why did you ask her to enter the apartment?" Nina hugged her head with both hands and wailed. She finally spilled the beans. Pointing at Seth, she said loudly, "Was him. He kept saying that I couldn't satisfy him. He wanted to break up with me. Unless I found another woman to have a threesome with him. Find another woman? You found the victim, Li Haiqing? When did you meet her? Gu Nianji was also nervous, but she still asked calmly. She could hear the sound of her blood gurgling in her ears. It made her excited and agitated. Now was the time to face the truth. Shut up. Seth roared at Nina and brandished his fists to threaten her. Nina also yelled at him, "You bastard! You wanted my cousin to have a threesome with you. My cousin agreed first, but then she rejected. She didn't come that day, so you beat me up and forced me to find another woman. Otherwise we would break up. I was confused and went downstairs to look for someone. I happened to see Li coming over, so I said I had something to do and asked her for help. She followed me in. And then?" Gu Nianji pressed. Nina began to dodge. Gu Nianji composed herself and said, "Even if you're guilty, you'll at most be an accomplice. If you can expose the real murderer, I'll help you plead with the judge and jury." Nina took a deep breath as if she had found hope. She said. She knew she was tricked the moment she came in and wanted to run. Then. Nina pointed at Seth. "He beat her up. It hurt so much. I'm most afraid of him hitting me." Nina curled up as if remembering the days when she was beaten by Seth. "What else?" Gu Nianji asked again, hoping Nina would spill everything in one go. But that girl didn't seem to be afraid of pain and fought back with all her might. Nina murmured. Her gaze was blank as if she was reminiscing. Seth was so angry that he had no choice but to use all his strength to beat her until she fainted. Then he raped her. How many times did he rape her? 5 or 6 times. Or 7 or 8. I can't remember. Nina lowered her head and her voice trailed off. Objection. The defense lawyer stood up again. Gu Nianji turned around and snapped at him. "Shut up. I'm still interrogating the defendant. Is that not allowed?" Her eyes flashed and her angry aura was a bit frightening. The defense lawyer was stunned by her. He opened his mouth, then sat down and began to search for information. Nina saw Gu Nianji's anger and was encouraged by her. She wasn't so afraid of Seth's family anymore. She continued, after he vented enough, he realized the girl was almost dead. "I was terrified at the time. Seth said to dump her here and come back when she was dead. That way he would have an alibi. But 3 hours later, when we came back and found she wasn't dead, Seth threw her out the window." Gu Nianji nodded and added, "Seth's apartment is on the 3rd floor. She was thrown out from the 3rd floor." Then Gu Nianji took out the autopsy report from the medical examiner. This autopsy report states that Li Haiqing's death was caused by a brutal beating that resulted in fractures and massive bleeding. The soft tissues under her skin broke down into free fat, causing lung blockage and cerebral hypoxia. That was the true cause of her death. This is the first update. A reminder to everyone for your monthly votes and recommendation votes. There will be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 608. In other words, Li Haiqing had been beaten to death. The courtroom was silent, and even Seth had regained his composure with a blank expression. Gu Nianji looked at everyone in the courtroom and turned to the defense lawyer. "I'll play another surveillance video." This time, the time of the video was early in the morning on May 15th. A pickup stopped in front of Seth's apartment, and a man and a woman got out of the car. It was Seth's mother, Ramona, and stepfather, York. They entered the apartment building that had already been designated as a key investigation area by the police. Then Gu Nianji fast-forwarded the surveillance video, and when it started playing normally, it showed that it was already evening. After spending almost the entire day in Seth's apartment, York and Ramona finally came out. The two of them carried a lot of black garbage bags out of the apartment building one by one and threw them into the trunk of the pickup. Finally, the pickup disappeared into the night. Gu Nianji stopped the surveillance video and looked at the ashen-faced York and Ramona. She asked again, "Didn't you say that you never went to Seth's apartment again after the case was filed? Then what about the 15th of May? The case was filed on May 13th, and Seth's apartment building was designated as a key investigation area. Nothing was allowed to be moved, but you stayed in Seth's apartment for an entire day on May 15th, from morning to night." Gu Nianji looked at Seth and asked, "Seth, how dirty is your apartment that your high-ranking police parents had to personally clean it for an entire day?" Large beads of sweat formed on Seth's forehead as he stared at the big screen in shock. He was furious. What the F***ck? How could something like this exist? He looked at his mother and stepfather for help. His mother, Ramona, looked at him with tears in her eyes, but his stepfather's face was livid and he didn't say a word. Gunyenji also didn't say anything and quietly watched the family's performance. Since the trial was being broadcasted, Gunyenji was certain that all of Germany was probably watching it. She was just a bit confused as to why the court hadn't realized that the trial was being broadcasted. Because she was worried that they would delete it quickly, Gunyenji had specially changed the password when she hacked into their official account. That way, even if they wanted to delete it, they would have to spend some effort to crack the password and log in. As expected, more and more people were watching the video on German social media. It was the first time that the Germans had found their country's judicial system so twisted. Wasn't the democratic election supposed to be able to elect scum? How did York, who was like a gang leader, get elected as a councilman again and again? How did he become the leader of the Democratic Party? Everyone in the courtroom was shocked by the surveillance footage that had just been played. Countless gazes moved between York and Ramona. Gunyenji gave them enough time before asking, "Mr. York, Ms. Ramona, may I ask where you threw the bags of things you took from Seth's apartment?" Of course, York and Ramona shut their mouths like clamshells and didn't say a word to Gunyenji. They weren't defendants or witnesses, so they could choose not to answer Gunyenji's questions. However, when Gunyenji asked them a question, she had no intention of letting them answer. What she needed to do was to expose this couple, who were full of lies, in front of the public, so that they would not be able to trample on judicial justice any further. Therefore, their silence was exactly what Gunyenji wanted. In the eyes of the people who were following the live broadcast of the trial, the couple was feeling guilty and didn't dare to say a word. "Your Honor, the direct evidence we have now shows that Seth and Nina were the last two people the victim, Li Haiqing, saw before she died. Also, Nina's testimony matches the autopsy results, so there is reason to believe that she is telling the truth. It proves that Seth is guilty of torture, rape, first-degree murder and second-degree murder. Nina is guilty of second-degree murder and assisting in rape. Furthermore, Roslaw Regional Police Chief York and Senior Superintendent Ramona obstructed justice and deliberately destroyed important evidence related to this case. Your Honor, please sentence them severely and punish the culprits." Gunyenji began to conclude her statement. At that moment, the defendant's lawyer, who had been badly battered by Gunyenji's rebuttal, suddenly discovered a law that could completely defend against the direct evidence Gunyenji had found. Objection. The defendant's lawyer immediately stood up. The surveillance footage of the antique store obtained by the plaintiff's lawyer included the area across from the store. This is an illegal act that violates the personal rights of passers-by, so it cannot be used as evidence against my client. As soon as he said that, York, Ramona, and the judge all sighed in relief. The judge was all smiles and was about to accept the defendant's lawyer's opinion and announced that the direct evidence was not accepted when Gunyenji immediately thought of a counterattack. She clearly said, "According to German criminal law, surveillance footage has priority over the personal rights of passers-by in a criminal case." In other words, for a criminal case, even if the surveillance footage exceeded its legal surveillance range, because it recorded direct evidence of a vicious criminal case, it was no longer illegal evidence but legal direct evidence. York's face darkened again. At that moment he finally felt that he couldn't let Gunyenji speak anymore. This female lawyer was truly too strong. He secretly gestured to the judge that they had agreed on. The judge understood and planned to sentence her according to their agreement. At that moment, the people from the Munich District Court finally discovered that their official social media account was broadcasting the trial live. In the courtroom, the judge raised his gavel and looked at the trial statement in front of him. It clearly said, "Due to lack of evidence, the defendant is acquitted." But before he could say anything, the courtroom door was pushed open with a bang. A person who looked like a clerk rushed into the courtroom and came to the judge's side to whisper a few words into his ear. The judge's face immediately darkened, and his hand holding the trial statement trembled slightly. His mouth opened and closed, but in the end he didn't dare to say the blatant favoritism of the trial statement. He lowered his voice and said to the clerk, "What's the use of telling me? Hurry up and delete the trial live broadcast." The person was about to cry and had a bitter expression. "The account password was changed, so we can't log in for the time being. We're currently contacting the company that runs the social media app and asking them to close our accounts, but they haven't replied yet." Of course they wouldn't reply. The court trial live broadcast was the most popular video on all German social media and attracted countless new users and traffic. It was such a great opportunity. Even if they could interfere, they had to pretend they didn't know and let the video fly for a while longer. It was the second half of the night. A reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 609. The judge trembled with anger and closed his eyes, his heart pounding like a drum. This was supposed to be a small matter. He had worked with York for many years and had handled all kinds of wrongful cases, but now for the first time he felt like his good days were coming to an end. The judge was confused and could only say, "Hurry up and solve the problem. Go now." The clerk left in a hurry and the judge looked at the familiar courtroom. Although he tried his best to remain calm, his trembling hands betrayed his thoughts. He trembled as he fumbled for the gavel on the table and tried several times before finally grabbing it. He planned to end today's trial immediately. Gunyenji was standing closer and eavesdropping. She knew they had finally discovered the live video of the trial. Gunyenji felt like she had said everything she needed to say, and the German people knew what they needed to know. Now, it would be up to how the case would play out on social media and traditional German media. Without a doubt, foreigners like them had to use the power of public opinion to go against the high-ranking police officers in Roslau. Silence. Due to the new direct evidence in this case, the case will be adjourned for the time being. Court adjourned. The judge banged his gavel with trembling hands and left the room like he was fleeing. York and Ramona looked at each other and didn't understand why the judge had changed his mind. They had agreed to release Ramona's son, Seth, without charge today, and then they would quickly send him abroad to avoid the limelight. In the end, the judge didn't even announce the verdict and left. What had happened that they didn't know? As she stared at the judge's slightly hunched back, Gunyenji was not in a good mood, especially after reading the information provided by the prosecutor, as well as the autopsy report from the medical examiner, as well as what the female defendant, Nina, had just said. It was like a boulder weighing heavily on her heart. Although they had won a complete victory this time, Gunyenji didn't smile at all. She packed up her laptop and put on her large sunglasses. Walking between Hijichu and the 4 male assistants, she walked out of the courthouse with them. Once outside, oh my God! There was a sea of people outside. It seemed like all the media in Germany had come. The national television stations, local television stations, newspapers, magazines, online media, and especially the social media that live-streamed the trial, sent many reporters over to interview the plaintiff's lawyer, the defendant's lawyer, the plaintiff's parents, and all the relevant witnesses. Gunyenji instinctively glanced at the plaintiff's parents. They were honest, ordinary people and had never seen such a big scene before. They were momentarily stunned. "Professor He, let's get them out of here." Gunyenji tugged at Hijichu's sleeve. Hijichu shook his head and said softly, "We don't have to worry about it. Minister Bai sent someone to bring them over. They'll help them fend off the reporters." Sure enough, a few Chinese people who were also wearing sunglasses squeezed in and came to the victim's parents. They said to the reporters, "Thank you for your attention to this case. We hope that the German side can face up to the justice of their country, punish the suspects and uphold justice for the dead." Gunyenji felt a different kind of feeling when she heard it, even though it was a fairly standard speech. These people were obviously from the Wuxia Imperial Embassy in Germany. Of course, a diplomat's words were watertight and smoother than a lawyer's. Gunyenji was relieved. The parents wouldn't be at a disadvantage if they followed these people. She followed Hijichu into the MPV without worry. Back at the hotel, Gunyenji took a quick shower and changed her clothes. She met up with Hijichu and the others to go out for a celebration dinner. Although the case hadn't been concluded yet, the live broadcast of the trial today was enough to give those who wanted to manipulate the case a hard time. The 6 of them called the driver of the MPV to go to the 4-star Michelin restaurant that Hijichu and Gunyenji had discovered for dinner. Gunyenji loved the Bavarian white sausages there. She ate 4 in one go and was so full that her stomach was round. Delicious food had a soothing effect. Gunyenji suddenly felt less depressed. They dined outdoors. The August night in Munich was quiet and crisp. Fireflies fluttered in the grass like little moving lanterns. The slightly intoxicating wind blew from the nearby Alps and Bavaria mountains, bringing with it the coolness of ancient glaciers. Hijichu and his male assistants were all drinking black draft beer. Only Gunyenji held a cup of hazelnut cream coffee and a small piece of blueberry cheesecake in front of her. The scent of Bavarian roses flowed in the air. Everything was too good to be true. Gunyenji discovered that she was getting drunk from the hazelnut cream coffee. Hijichu sat next to her at a comfortable distance. He wasn't looking at her but was listening to the conversation of the other 4 assistants. They drank and discussed the case. Smith, the assistant who had been sent by Hijichu to check on the preparations for the German branch of the law firm, regretted it so much that he didn't even look at Gunyenji. He was afraid that if he looked at her, Hijichu would teach him a lesson again. Hijichu didn't eat much. He had a large glass of draft beer in front of him. He said to Gunyenji, "I'll be meeting with a few people from the German government in the next few days. I'll also be preparing for the establishment of the German branch of the law firm. What do you plan to do?" Gunyenji propped her head up with her hand as the cool night wind blew. Her entire body was slack from extreme nervousness. She was lazy and didn't have much energy. What would she do in the next few days when she didn't have to appear in court? She wanted to look for Hua Xiaoheng the most, but Germany was so big. How would she find him? Gunyenji laughed bitterly on the inside but didn't dare to show it on her face. After thinking for a while, Gunyenji said, "I'll rest first. I've been busy with court as soon as I arrived in Germany. I'm still jet-lagged. I've been drinking black coffee every day." Hijichu nodded and snapped out of his daze. He asked her quietly, "Why are you so passionate about this case?" Gunyenji was also confused. She twirled the hazelnut cream coffee in her hand and mumbled, "Actually, I don't know either." In the beginning, she had wanted to use this opportunity to come to Germany and see Hua Xiaoheng. But after she arrived, she realized it was almost impossible to find someone here, so she focused her attention on the case. In the end, the more she learned, the angrier she became. She even had an inexplicable feeling of empathy, so she completely devoted herself to the case. Hijichu's shimmering, sultry eyes were especially gentle in the Munich night. He said gently, "As a lawyer, you just have to do your job seriously. Don't invest too much in your personal feelings. A successful lawyer doesn't need too much passion, but the highest degree of calmness. Otherwise, if you get too involved in your personal feelings, it will prevent you from making proper legal judgments. Think about the goddess of law. She's always as calm as a mountain. She'd rather cover her eyes and feel the scales in her hands, but she can't be swayed by emotions." Gunyenji knew Hijichu was teaching her. She accepted it sincerely and quietly took a sip of the hazelnut cream coffee. When the meal was finally over, the 4 American assistants were already drunk and lying on the floor. Luckily, they didn't have to drive themselves. The driver dropped them off at the hotel and glanced at Gunyenji. "Miss Gu, everyone is praising you." The live broadcast of the trial was eventually deleted from the court's official account. However, someone had already saved the video and uploaded it to another account for everyone to watch. Gunyenji never showed her face in the video, but everyone was familiar with her voice. Her standard Oxford English and Hijichu's standard Hanover German left a deep impression on everyone. The driver had obviously also watched the live broadcast of the trial. Although Gunyenji didn't appear in the video, he knew from her voice that she was the only female lawyer in the legal team. She looked delicate and slender, but he hadn't expected her words to be as sharp as knives in court. She made the famous rogue lawyer, the judge who tried to bluff his way through, and the arrogant York speechless. "Thank you." Gunyenji nodded with a smile. "But it's not all my work. Our team is very good. They were the ones who came up with it. I was just following the script." Gunyenji didn't want to take credit alone. In fact, the main credit should belong to the righteous police who quietly investigated. Although they didn't dare to step forward, they protected all the evidence well as the prosecutor and the procuratorate. Without their efforts to provide detailed and heavy evidence, she wouldn't have been able to convince everyone no matter how glib her tongue was. In the dark Roslau region, it was because of these people that people felt that the night wasn't so dark yet, and that there was still hope for humanity. Gunyenji was very grateful to the prosecutor for giving all the information to her. She was also grateful to the police in the Roslau region who secretly hid the direct evidence. If they hadn't tacitly hidden it from the suspect's high-ranking police parents, the truth of the case wouldn't have come to light so easily. Gunyenji raised her simple coffee cup to the starry night sky in Munich. To all those who uphold justice. There were too many crooks and honest people in the legal profession. Being so professional, if one went against their conscience, it was very easy to distort the truth. Fortunately, the public's awareness and knowledge level were constantly improving. The era of one person controlling the world with one hand was already over. Gunyenji thought of Hua Xiaoheng. If he was by her side now, he would definitely be proud of her, right? Because she was helping him protect what he wanted to protect. While Gunyenji was thinking about Hua Xiaoheng, she didn't know his current situation was very tense. Hua Xiaoheng was an extremely patient person. Although he was only 29 years old, he had walked on the edge of life and death for the past decade. He had fought against the most elite, the smartest, the most cunning, and the most vicious enemies from every country. Sitting in his rented apartment, Hua Xiaoheng very carefully removed the gauze to see how his injuries were healing. This was the first update. A reminder to everyone for their monthly votes and recommendation votes. There will be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 610. Xiaoheng's abdomen had suffered a minor injury from the explosion that night. Although it wasn't serious, it had worsened because he had planned to assassinate Sean. He had been recuperating in his apartment for the past 2 weeks. Because the wound had become infected, he had a high fever for a few days, but it wasn't to the point of losing consciousness. He definitely couldn't go to the hospital. He knew very well that American hospitals had the obligation to report injuries caused by gunshots, burns and explosions to the police. Once he went to the hospital, his condition would be exposed. He couldn't let those people know that he was injured. Moreover, it wasn't a serious injury. When they went out on missions, they always brought special anti-inflammatory drugs made by the Special Operations Forces. Recuperating alone in his apartment and changing his dressing on time, his wound healed quickly. This time he didn't need to wrap it up again after removing the gauze. He looked in the mirror and saw that there were a few more scars on his strong abdominal muscles. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to see them. These injuries were nothing. He calmly threw the gauze into the stainless steel trash can and used a lighter to burn the gauze before flushing the ashes into the toilet. After cleaning everything up, he was a little tired and lay on the sofa to rest. One arm was draped over his forehead to cover his eyes. The sunlight coming in through the window was a little dazzling. He knew very well that for him and his comrades, if they failed the mission, there would only be one outcome: death. Their bodies would be destroyed and not even their ashes would be found. His position was even more different. This was an industry where only success was allowed, not failure. This time he was betrayed and fell into someone else's trap. It was his negligence. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and hid in the shadows to escape the enemy's pursuit. He even turned the tables and won himself a powerful ally. Half a month had passed since he had gotten rid of Sean. Xiaoheng didn't make another move. Instead, he patiently waited in his high-end apartment in New Jersey to recuperate. Calculating the time, James had been the director of the CIA's Asian Intelligence Division for almost half a month. If he guessed correctly, James should have tried to contact him. Xiaoheng tidied himself up and changed into a black Ralph Lauren polo, khaki slacks, large sunglasses and a tennis bag. He drove the rented Mercedes-Benz SUV to Long Island, New York. He and James had agreed to meet at Tanguyeren's villa in Long Island, New York. He told Mr. Gu about it and also explained it to Tanguyeren. Of course, he had purposely given Tanguyeren this information and purposely didn't give her a way to contact him. That way, when James contacted Tanguyeren to look for him, Tanguyeren would definitely have to think of a way to deliver the letter to him. But without his contact information, she could only ask her parents back in the empire. Xiaoheng wanted to use this method to provoke the traitor who had betrayed him because he was certain that this traitor had something to do with the people who had instigated the Tans. If it wasn't for this person, the Tans wouldn't have tried so hard to get Xiaoheng to personally come to New York to rescue them. As long as the person behind the Tan family surfaced, the traitor's whereabouts would not be far away. He waited for half a month so that this matter would have time to ferment in the country. However, if he didn't show himself, the other party would be anxious. The other party would make a stupid move and expose himself. It was the middle of August in New York, and the incandescent sunlight made people dizzy. As he drove along the seaside road in Long Island, Xiaoheng cautiously observed his surroundings. There was a device in the car to detect radio surveillance equipment, but there was no response at all on the way here. He remembered that the last time he was here, there were still many CIA agents monitoring the Tans, both openly and secretly. He parked the car near the tennis court in the villa area and played a few rounds of indoor tennis. After observing the surroundings, he finally arrived at Tanguyeren's villa and rang the doorbell. A middle-aged woman in her 40s who looked like a maid walked over and asked, "May I ask who you are looking for?" "I'm looking for your mistress. Just tell her that Mr. Gu is here to visit." Xiaoheng smiled slightly and knocked the tennis racket against his palm twice. Tanguyeren's heart skipped a beat when she heard Mr. Gu had arrived. She quickly put on her shoes and ran out. Seeing Xiaoheng's tall figure standing in front of the iron gate, Tanguyeren suddenly felt her eyes moisten. Tanguyeren had been worried sick for the past half a month. She had contacted her parents in the Wuxia Empire and asked them to find Xiaoheng's contact information. In the end, they did find Xiaoheng's phone number and email address, but no matter how she called or emailed, it was like a stone sinking into the ocean. She almost thought that Xiaoheng was purposely avoiding her from now on. She hadn't expected him to finally appear. Tanguyeren quickly walked over and opened the iron gate. she said quietly. You're here? A faint smile appeared on Hua Xiaoheng's calm face. Miss Tan, sorry to disturb you. You're welcome, Tang Guiran quickly said. Come in quickly. I've been looking for you. But you haven't been here for a long time, and I didn't know your contact information. I was worried. Luckily you're here again. Hua Xiaoheng greeted Tang Guiran with a smile at the door and said, I came to play tennis with a friend and dropped by to see you. How are you? Is it safe to stay here? Why aren't you back in the Huaxia Empire? He then asked her, Why are you looking for me? His relaxed attitude finally calmed Tang Guiran's uneasy heart. She looked around and moved closer to Hua Xiaoheng. She whispered, Someone sent a letter to Mr. Gu. Hua Xiaoheng knew it was probably from James. He nodded. Can I trouble Miss Tan to show it to me? Come in. Are you in a hurry? Tang Guiran's face was slightly red, and a few beads of sweat formed on the tip of her nose. Her porcelain face had a kind of touching delicacy, but unfortunately, the man in front of her didn't seem to be romantic. Hua Xiaoheng folded his hands behind his back and looked at the shady trees on the side of the road. My friend is still waiting for me. All right then. Tang Guiran was slightly disappointed. I'll go get the letter for you. She handed the letter to Hua Xiaoheng. Tang Guiran, who usually didn't speak much, suddenly said, Are you on a special mission? Hua Xiaoheng was speechless. He looked up at Tang Guiran and said calmly, Yes. Don't tell anyone else. The professionally trained Hua Xiaoheng knew that telling someone a secret, and then asking them not to tell anyone else was the best way to spread that secret. What was a secret? What wasn't said was a secret. Anything that was said wasn't a secret, even if it was said to the tree hole. How did you know there wasn't a pair of ears on the other side of the tree hole? Tang Guiran felt a sacred sense of being entrusted. She clasped her hands in front of her chest and nodded very hard. I definitely won't tell anyone. I swear on my life. Hua Xiaoheng was speechless. He lowered his eyes and quickly read James' letter. He was slightly surprised. This was probably James' proof of loyalty to him. It was the second watch. A reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 6:11. James had subtly mentioned the location of the bugs and pinhole cameras at Tang Guiran's house. Hua Xiaoheng could go to Tang Guiran's house now and find those things or destroy them. Folding the letter and putting it back in the envelope, Hua Xiaoheng smiled at Tang Guiran. It's still early. I'm a bit thirsty. Oh, come on in. I'll make you some tea. Tang Guiran was excited. Hua Xiaoheng hadn't come in no matter how she invited him before, but he was willing to come in after reading the letter. Did he want to express his gratitude? Tang Guiran walked briskly beside Hua Xiaoheng. Oh, Mr. Gu, how should I address you? Hua Xiaoheng looked at the decorations in the yard as he felt the control of the radio detector in his headset. There was no radio interference or receiving equipment within a 5-mile radius. James had indeed cleaned the place very well. Hua Xiaoheng was slightly relieved. This time he finally followed Tang Guiran into her house. Tang Guiran turned and ran back to her room, her steps staggering. Hua Xiaoheng's smile didn't change as he held a tennis racket in one hand and stood under the tree in front of the iron gate. The leaves rustled softly and made a small noise that mingled with the sound of the waves in the distance. This was what Tang Guiran saw when she came back with James' letter. Her heart pounded and she could hear her own heartbeat. Tang Guiran remembered that he had only been willing to stand at the door for a while before asking her for a favor. The past was still vivid in her mind. Coupled with the fact that they had been through life and death together, Tang Guiran, who was usually very distant with outsiders and didn't know how to socialize, found that she didn't feel distant with Hua Xiaoheng at all. It was as if she had known him for a long time. Meeting him for the first time was like returning an old friend. She personally made a cup of dahong pao and brought it over to him, placing it on the coffee table in front of Hua Xiaoheng. There was a pot of silver jasmine flowers and a small bronze Buddha statue on the transparent postmodern glass coffee table. Hua Xiaoheng nodded politely and picked it up to smell it. He smiled. This is dahong pao? It smells okay. Tang Guiran tilted her head and smiled, her long black hair flowing down like flowing water. You have great taste. Hua Xiaoheng put down the cup and stood up to walk around. He basically confirmed the locations of the bugs and pinhole cameras that James had indicated. He put his hand into his trouser pocket and pressed on his phone. A series of ringtones sounded. Taking out his phone and swiping it open, Hua Xiaoheng grunted and said to Tang Guiran, I'm sorry. My friend has been waiting anxiously. Oh. Tang Guiran was a bit disappointed. She thought she would be able to spend more time with Hua Xiaoheng, but she didn't urge him to stay. She politely said, "Then go ahead and do your work. Come back when you have time. My door is always open for you." "Thank you." Hua Xiaoheng nodded and left with his tennis racket. Tang Guiran walked him to the door. She wanted to say something several times but stopped herself. Finally, when Hua Xiaoheng stepped out of the metal door, she called out, "Can you give me your phone number? This way if there's anything in the future I can look for you directly." This was the first time Tang Guiran had ever asked a man for his number. In the past, it was always those men chasing after her to ask for her phone number. She was very annoyed. She didn't expect that the tables would turn. There would come a day when she would ask a man for his phone number. But she was doing it for business, to pass on his message, wasn't she? Tang Guiran tried to convince herself, but her heart was still pounding and her eyes were burning. Hua Xiaoheng turned to look at her with a smile. "If there's anything, I'll look for Miss Tan. Goodbye." He left just like that without leaving her his number. Tang Guiran was a bit disappointed. She stood under the tree in front of the door and watched Hua Xiaoheng's receding figure until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she reluctantly turned to go home. A few days after Hua Xiaoheng left, James came to visit Tang Guiran's house again. He was now the director of the CIA's Asian Intelligence Division, and Tang Guiran was the only daughter of Tan Dongbang, the popular Huaxia Imperial Prime Minister candidate. She was in the United States, and as the director of the CIA's Asian Intelligence Division, it was his duty to visit her and monitor her. Therefore he could visit Tang Guiran from time to time. This was his job and wouldn't arouse any suspicion. "Miss Tan, how are you living here? Is there anything we can help you with?" James asked politely. "If there's anything you need, please let us know." Tang Guiran quickly shook her head. "I'm living quite well here. It's safer than at school." "But," she hesitated. "The letter you asked me to pass on last time? Oh? I'd have forgotten about it if you hadn't mentioned it." James smiled, but his eyes were glued to Tang Guiran's face. He wanted to see her true feelings from her expression and whether she was lying. Tang Guiran placed an unopened bottle of mineral water on the coffee table in front of James. "Please have a drink." She then said, "Mr. Gu has already taken the letter." James heaved a long sigh of relief. "May I ask when it was taken away? It seems like it's been a long time. I don't even remember." "Yeah, it's been a long time. He never came and I couldn't find him." Tang Guiran was very tactful. "This time he only came to my house after 16 days. She remembered it so clearly. James looked at Tang Guiran in surprise and couldn't help but smile when he saw her hidden thoughts from the redness on her face. It looked like this mysterious Major General who also had a weakness. No wonder he had personally come to rescue her. It must be because this Miss Tan was no ordinary person. No wonder their people had chosen Tang Guiran as a hostage. It turned out that they knew about their relationship. And Hua Xiaoheng didn't stay with her after rescuing Tang Guiran. Instead, he tried his best to distance himself from her. From James' point of view, it was easy to understand. Because it was to protect Tang Guiran. If he loved her, he had to neglect her. That way Tang Guiran would be safe. James thought about it from beginning to end, and the more he thought about it, the more he believed his analysis was reliable. He didn't expect Hua Xiaoheng or Tang Guiran to publicly admit their relationship, but from the clues, James felt like he had discovered the truth. He didn't touch the mineral water Tang Guiran placed in front of him and stood to shake her hand. "Thank you for your help, Miss Tan. From now on, I will come to Miss Tan's house for tea at this time every 3 days. If Mr. Gu is free, we can come together." Tang Guiran raised her brows in surprise. "You like tea too? Sorry about that." She didn't like coffee and only liked simple things like tea or plain water. She politely declined coffee and other beverages. James was a Westerner. Although Westerners also drank tea, it was different from the tea of the Huaxia Empire. She thought he wouldn't like tea from the Huaxia Empire. "I really like tea from the Huaxia Empire." James left after saying that. Tang Guiran memorized this message. However, Hua Xiaoheng didn't come again for a while. Until one evening when the weather outside suddenly turned gloomy. Thunder rumbled and rolled over the sea. Dark clouds pressed down on the horizon, and the entire sky seemed like it was about to collapse. Although this scene looked scary, the people who lived by the sea had already turned a blind eye to it. Wasn't there going to be a hurricane? Why would people living by the sea be afraid of hurricanes? The people who were afraid had already moved away. So everyone continued to leisurely do their own things. The TV station had already predicted the approaching hurricane a few days ago. This time it was named Isabella. The sea breeze grew stronger as Tan Guerin returned from outside in the nanny car driven by Sister Fun. She remotely opened the metal gate and drove the nanny car to the garage. The garage was connected to the main house, so they didn't have to worry about the rain after entering. In fact, as soon as they drove into the garage, the torrential rain brought by the hurricane came crashing down. The sky seemed to have been torn open, and the water from the Milky Way poured down. The raindrops were so heavy that they could practically smash a deep hole in the ground. Tan Guerin got out of the car and quickly entered the main house through the garage's small door. Sister Fan took out the food and groceries they had bought from the back of the nanny car. Because of the hurricane, people were worried about water and electricity outages and traffic safety. Everyone was used to stocking up their fridges before the hurricane. Tan Guerin had just entered the house when she heard the video communicator on the living room wall start beeping. The other end of the communicator was outside the main door. Visitors usually communicated with the people in the main house through the video communicator before they could enter. She glanced at the video intercom and was stunned. Instinctively turning to look at the pouring rain outside, she rushed out without a second thought. Sister Fan had just carried a few large bags of food and groceries into the main house's living room when she saw that the living room door was wide open. The howling hurricane mixed with the torrential rain immediately soaked the living room's cashmere carpet. She could still see Tan Guerin running out of the house from the wide-open door. Sister Fan was dumbfounded. She put down the food and groceries and hurriedly grabbed the big black umbrella she often used by the door and rushed out into the rain shouting, Miss, it's a storm. You need an umbrella." Tan Guerin didn't hear anything. All she could see was the figure soaked in the rain in front of the metal gate not far away. She had actually seen Hua Xiaoheng standing outside the yard's metal gate in the video communicator. He must be completely soaked in such heavy rain. Tan Guerin ran to the yard's gate, panting. She quickly opened the metal gate and turned to say, "Come in. Why didn't you bring an umbrella in such heavy rain?" Hua Xiaoheng walked in with a tennis bag on his back and a tennis racket in his hand. He glanced at Tan Guerin and said, "Thank you." Tan Guerin actually hadn't brought an umbrella. She was already soaked from the rain in just a few steps. Her silk dress clung to her body, revealing the outline of her beautiful breasts, slim waist and long legs. Her hair was also wet, and the rainwater flowed down her slender neck and into the shadow of her chest. At that moment, Sister Fan had already caught up with them with the big black umbrella. She quickly covered Tan Guerin while sneaking a peek at Hua Xiaoheng, who was also soaked. Hua Xiaoheng was still in his tennis attire and big sunglasses. He looked at Sister Fan's curious face and said, "Go in quickly. Your miss is soaked. I'm here to play tennis and there's a storm. I'd like to borrow your place for shelter." This was the first update. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. There would be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 6:12. It's fine, it's fine. Please come in, come in. The helper, Mrs. Fun, was very friendly. She held an umbrella for Tan Guerin as she ushered Hua Xiaoheng into the main house. Hua Xiaoheng nodded and quickly walked up the stairs to the main house. The door opened and everyone filed in. The last helper, Mrs. Fun, closed the door behind her, and the raging hurricane was immediately blocked outside. The floor in the house was a bit wet, but the air was fresh and warm. It was a completely different world from the storm outside. Tan Guerin bit her lip and was a bit embarrassed. "Please have a seat. I'll go change." She then said to Mrs. Fun, "Pour this gentleman a cup of tea." She specifically instructed, "I want the Dahong Pao over there." Mrs. Fun agreed and quickly said, "Miss, you should quickly change. You'll catch a cold wearing these wet clothes. I'll make a bowl of ginger soup for you." Tan Guerin nodded and quickly ran to her bedroom to change. Hua Xiaoheng was also wet, but he didn't sit down. He looked around and asked Mrs. Fun, "Where's the bathroom?" Mrs. Fun smiled and said, "This way." She brought him a large towel. "Sir, you have to change too. We don't have anything suitable for you here. We only have Mr. Tan's clothes. Would you like to change for now?" She was talking about Tan Dongbang's clothes, which was Tan Guerin's father's. This villa belonged to the Tans, so Tan Dongbang must have his own things here. Hua Xiaoheng smiled. "No need. I have a change of clothes in my bag. I was going to a party after tennis today, so I brought a set." "That's great." Mrs. Fan didn't insist. "Help yourself. I'll go make some tea." Hua Xiaoheng used a device in the bathroom to confirm there were no bugs or pinhole cameras installed before quickly changing into the dry clothes in his bag. He had worn a tennis polo and khaki slacks when he came, but now he had changed into a dark blue Egyptian cotton non-ironing shirt and slim suit pants. He walked out of the bathroom and took off his sunglasses. Tan Guerin came out after changing and was looking around for him. She looked up to see a man walk out of the bathroom. He didn't make any unnecessary movements and only turned around to close the bathroom door. He still had a tennis bag on his arm. It was such a casual gesture, but it struck Tan Guerin's heart like an arrow. If the tall and imposing figure in the past had only been a blurry shadow in Tan Guerin's heart, then Hua Xiaoheng's current appearance had become an unforgettable presence in her heart. Hua Xiaoheng turned his head to look at her. His eyes were deep and dark and she couldn't see what was in them. She only felt dizzy. She tried her best to steady herself and said in a trembling voice, "What, Mr. Gu?" Hua Xiaoheng nodded casually. "Sorry to bother you. I'll leave when the rain stops." The wind and rain outside the window became even more violent. Raindrops smashed against the roof and windows, leaving long marks. There were street lamps under the big trees outside, and they were swaying left and right by the strong wind. Dense raindrops flashed in the flickering lights from time to time. The rain was really heavy. The hurricane by the sea was something even a warship couldn't resist. Tan Guerin wanted to ask him to stay, but her intuition told her that Hua Xiaoheng was a man of his word and wouldn't listen to her. She obediently agreed and turned to go to the living room. Hua Xiaoheng followed her to the living room and sat down. There was already a steaming cup of Dahong Pao tea on the coffee table. He held it up to blow on the steam and then lowered his head to take a sip. Tan Guerin sat on the sofa across from him and adjusted the hem of her dress nervously. She had just changed her clothes. The light blue silk dress from before was soaked through. She had changed into a burgundy top with 4/4 sleeves and a pinch at the waist, paired with a pair of cropped pants and black Camellia Chanel slippers. Her legs were crossed and slanted in front of her. Her posture was so dignified that it could be included in the Encyclopedia of Western Etiquette. The living room was so quiet that it was awkward. At this time, Tan Guerin was the host, so she should take the initiative to talk to the guests. However, Tan Guerin had been well protected by her family since she was young and had only interacted with people in her own circle. Most of the time, she greeted them with a smile and didn't speak unless she had to, so she wasn't good with words. Usually when she was with her friends would take the initiative to start a conversation, and she only had to follow. Now that she had to start a conversation, it was worse than killing her. Hua Xiaoheng didn't bat an eyelid as if he didn't see Tan Guerin's awkwardness. However, it wasn't as if he didn't see the clothes she had carefully chosen. His eyes flashed as he asked casually, "Miss Tan, your father's election is coming up soon, right? Why isn't he going back yet?" Tan Guerin secretly heaved a sigh of relief and immediately said briskly, "The voting is in 2 months. But since something happened to me, the Huaxia Parliament agreed to give me some time to recuperate. I can go back after the election." According to the election law, a candidate's immediate family was supposed to return to the country 60 days before the election. However, Tan Guerin's kidnapping case happened, and the Huaxia Parliament didn't allow the Tans to use their daughter's incident to create hype. Moreover, the Bais also tacitly agreed, so the House of Representatives in charge of elections agreed to the Tans' request and allowed Tan Guerin to temporarily not return to the country. The Bais only had one condition. Since she had already violated the law by not returning to the country on time, she had to wait until the election results were out. The Bais were worried that the Tans would suddenly cause trouble on the eve of the election and use their daughter's return to the country to create hype, so they suggested that she return after the election. Of course, the Tans weren't willing, but they couldn't stop Tan Guerin from leaving New York, so they could only give up. Now that Hua Xiaoheng asked, she definitely wouldn't say that she wasn't going back because he was here. In the beginning, she was only worried that he would be in danger after being mistaken as a kidnapper. She would never abandon her savior. Later on, she didn't know when it started to feel strange. When Hua Xiaoheng heard that the House of Representatives had approved it, he thought about it and understood. It must be a political exchange. He didn't ask further and gradually led the topic to the Tan social relations. "Miss Tan, your relatives and friends must be very worried that something so serious happened to you in the United States, right? Have they come to visit you?" Tan Guerin thought about it very seriously and said, "No. Most of our relatives are in the Huaxia Parliament. Very few are overseas, but they're still in Europe. Those in the United States all went back after finishing their studies or settled down in Europe." In the eyes of the Kais and the Tans, who were truly scholarly families with deep roots, the United States was a country established by the descendants of immigrants who couldn't make it in Europe, while Australia was a country that accommodated the criminals exiled by the British Empire. Neither of them were good places. It was the second watch. A reminder, recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 6:13. The Tans and the Kais either wanted to stay in the Wuxia Empire wholeheartedly and felt that the Wuxia Empire was better than anywhere else, or they could only live in the more culturally rich European continent. Hua Xiaoheng looked thoughtfully at a large plum vase in the corner of the living room. It looked like it had at least 1,000 years of history and was definitely an antique. He just didn't know how it had been taken out. Tan Guiren followed Hua Xiaoheng's gaze and saw that he was interested in the plum vase. She quickly said, "That was a gift from my distant aunt. My aunt's family settled in the United States a long time ago. She's one of the few relatives who have settled in the United States." Really? Yes, my distant aunt's great-grandfather went abroad in his generation. If I think about it, it should be at least 100 years. Hua Xiaoheng was relieved. It turned out that she had been taken abroad a long time ago. At that time the country was in chaos. After the conversation ended, the living room fell into silence again. Tan Guiren mustered her courage and said to Hua Xiaoheng, "I really have to thank you this time. If it wasn't for you, I definitely wouldn't be alive." Hua Xiaoheng tapped his knee lightly as if nothing had happened. He smiled and said, "You're welcome. This is my job. But you have such a high status. You don't need to come here personally. I'm really sorry that I've put you in danger," Tan Guiren said anxiously. She stood up and bowed deeply to Hua Xiaoheng. "Thank goodness you're fine. If anything had happened to you, I would have lived with guilt for the rest of my life." "Miss Tan, you're exaggerating." Hua Xiaoheng shifted on the sofa without batting an eyelid. "Actually, I just happened to have a mission here, so I came over." "Really?" Tan Guiren's eyes widened as she slowly sat down across from him. "But my mother said that they specifically asked you to come here personally." He didn't say anything for a moment. After thinking for a moment, he said, "I'm very surprised that your Mistress Hall thought of me. Actually, our country's special forces are all very outstanding. No matter who we send, they can complete the mission." Tan Guiren shook her head. "It's different. You're different from them. That night, I asked you to save those 2 children. Only you went with me. They didn't go." Hua Xiaoheng froze for a moment and finally said bluntly, "I'm just thinking about Miss Tan's safety. To be honest, those 2 children are not under my protection." "But you still went." Tan Guiren smiled sweetly. "And later, when you saved that little girl on 5th Avenue, I knew I wasn't wrong about you." The corners of Hua Xiaoheng's lips twitched. He looked out the window at the heavy rain and said, "It was just a coincidence." After he said that, Hua Xiaoheng suddenly thought that if Gu Nianji heard this, she would definitely shake her head in disbelief and say that he never did things he wasn't confident in. If that was the case, why would he be impulsive? His mind wandered for a moment as he stared at the fireplace in front of him. He only heard Tan Guiren talking, but he didn't pay attention to what she was saying. How could it be a coincidence? I'm not a fool. Not only will I use my eyes to see, I will also use my heart to see. Tan Guiren smiled like a flower and made a heart shape with her slender fingers in front of her chest. "My mother's good friend recommended you to her. How could it be wrong?" "Oh? Your mom's friend recommended it? That's so surprising. Not many people in the Wuxia Empire know me." Hua Xiaoheng heard that Tan Guiren had finally gotten to the topic he wanted to hear and came back to his senses. He immediately asked without batting an eyelid, "Really? I think so." Tan Guiren giggled. "You didn't leave your contact information this time. I was worried that the gentleman's letter was urgent, so I specifically called the Wuxia Empire to ask my parents to help find your contact information, but they couldn't find it either. My mom even went to look for her good friend, but it turned out that he didn't know your contact information either. He then asked me what it was about." "Then did you tell him?" Hua Xiaoheng was a bit nervous, and his heartbeat sped up a little because if Tan Guiren told him, he would probably be able to find out who the traitor was and who was betraying him. He had gone around in circles and even exposed his identity in front of Tan Guiren, a girl with a one-track mind, just to force the person behind the scenes to come out and make them jump. Hua Xiaoheng originally thought that someone like Tan Guiren didn't know what confidentiality was and would definitely tell her family about it. That way he would be able to follow the clues and find out who it was. In the end, Tan Guiren actually shook her head proudly. "Of course not. I know you do important work and I just felt that this letter must be very important. I would never tell anyone what was going on. I didn't even tell my mom when she asked me. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at Hua Xiaoheng, her expression begging for praise. Hua Xiaoheng closed his eyes and suppressed a bitter smile and a mocking expression. Although it was difficult to talk to someone who had both IQ and EQ offline, it was better than facing a vicious enemy. Moreover, he had undergone professional training and was used to dealing with all kinds of people. He was more patient than most people. Hua Xiaoheng nodded. "Thank you, Miss Tan." The two of them spoke for a while before a gust of wind blew in from outside, and the lights in the room suddenly went out. Tan Guirin let out a small scream. The helper, Sis Fun, ran out from the kitchen and shouted, "The power's out! The power's out!" The wind outside must have cut the line. Hua Xiaoheng stood up. In the darkness, his deep and magnetic voice had an indescribable charm. Tan Guirin's heart instantly calmed. "Don't worry, Sis Fun. I remember there's a diesel generator at home. Let's go check the basement." Tan Guirin also stood up from the sofa and walked 2 steps forward. The room was too dark and she forgot there was a small stool next to the sofa. She accidentally tripped and fell to the ground with a thud. Hua Xiaoheng's eyes had already adjusted to the darkness, and he also saw Tan Guirin trip over the stool. He stood to the side quietly and didn't reach out to help her up. When Tan Guirin was being held hostage by criminals, he would definitely save her because it was his duty. But she had fallen at home, so he had no obligation to help her up. It wasn't a fatal injury, so Hua Xiaoheng's expression was very calm. Tan Guirin lay on the ground for a while before sitting down to rub her foot softly. She rubbed her calf. Her ankle was a bit uncomfortable, and she didn't know if she had sprained it. When Sis Fun heard the noise, she quickly took out her flashlight and shone it over. Miss. Hua Xiaoheng pointed at the sofa. "Miss Tan tripped just now, but she's fine now." Sis Fun rushed over, shouting and waving the flashlight in her hand. Miss, are you okay?" Hua Xiaoheng crossed his arms and said to Sis Fun, "Where's the generator?" "I'll go take a look." "It's in the basement. Go out this way and there's a staircase that leads straight to the basement." Sis Fun waved the flashlight in the direction of the staircase. Hua Xiaoheng bent down to take the flashlight from Sis Fun and turned to walk in that direction. Sis Fun froze and Tan Guirin blushed even more. When Hua Xiaoheng bent down just now, she thought he was going to carry her up. Sis Fun helped Tan Guirin up and said with some dissatisfaction, "This gentleman is not gentlemanly at all. Miss, you fell to the ground and he didn't even help you up." Tan Guirin forced a smile. "It's not his fault. It's so dark that he couldn't see." "That's true." Sis Fun was only saying it casually, and seeing that Tan Guirin didn't care, she, an outsider, didn't need to care. Hua Xiaoheng took the flashlight to the basement and found the diesel generator in a small room. The main control room for the entire villa was also here, as well as the boiler for boiling water and the central control system for the air conditioner. Here was the main control system for the bugs and pinhole cameras that the CIA had installed. Of course, this was also what James had revealed to him. Because of the sudden power outage, the backup power for the main control system had been activated. Only a red light could be seen in the darkness, shining in the small room. Hua Xiaoheng looked at it expressionlessly, took out an insulating knife, and gently cut off the backup power wire. The red light disappeared instantly. This meant that all the bugs and pinhole cameras in the house had stopped working. Then Hua Xiaoheng bent down to start the diesel generator. Soon, the lights in the house came on, and the situation here became clearer. He looked around again before walking up from the basement. When he returned to the living room, Tan Guirin was still sitting on the sofa, rubbing her ankle. Only a small light was turned on, and the warm yellow light warmed the empty living room. The storm outside the window didn't seem to be as bad anymore. Hua Xiaoheng put the flashlight on the coffee table and said, "When will the rain stop outside?" Tan Guirin quickly turned on the TV to watch the weather report. On the TV, the weatherman in a raincoat was anxiously saying, "Isabella is showing signs of escalating. The storm will last all night, so please be careful and don't go out." Hua Xiaoheng was speechless. Tan Guirin sneaked a peek at Hua Xiaoheng's calm face and secretly felt happy. However, she still appeared calm on the surface and said gently, "Mr. Gu, why don't you stay here tonight? I have a lot of rooms. There are 3 guest rooms upstairs and 1 downstairs." Hua Xiaoheng thought about it and turned to look at the rain outside the window. As if he had made up his mind, he said, "If the rain doesn't stop by 10 tonight, then I'll have to trouble you." It's fine. Tan Guirin was very enthusiastic and asked Hua Xiaoheng, "It's getting late. Let's go for dinner. Sister Fan's Yangzhou food is amazing." The Tans were from the south, and Tan Guirin had grown up eating Yangzhou food made by the family chef. When she went abroad, she even brought a maid who knew how to cook Yangzhou food with her. Hua Xiaoheng didn't like the bland taste of Yangzhou food, but he didn't refuse. He nodded politely and said, "Thank you." For Hua Xiaoheng, when he appeared as the Major General in charge of the Special Operations Forces, he didn't eat food from outside. However, when he was on a mission and there were changes around him, he definitely couldn't do that. He had to eat and drink what he had to drink. Today's dinner was something he had planned a long time ago. This was the first update. A reminder to everyone about your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Today was Monday, especially with the recommendation votes. There would be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 6:14. Tan Guirin brought Hua Xiaoheng to the dining room to sit down. Because they were using a household diesel generator to generate electricity, they couldn't be as carefree as before when they had public electricity. Only a small light was turned on in the living room, and only the ceiling light was on in the dining room. On the long dining table were 4 appetizing dishes and 1 soup. They were all authentic Yangzhou cuisine. In the middle was a lotus-shaped soup bowl with a round, fist-sized lion's head and 2 green vegetables inside. The soup was very fragrant and one could smell it when they were close. On each side was a plate of stir-fried shredded vegetables, a plate of fried shrimp, a plate of mushroom and vegetable hearts and a bowl of mirror box tofu. Vegetables took up more than half of the dishes. Without hesitation, Tan Guirin scooped the only lion's head into Hua Xiaoheng's bowl. "Try this. It's Mrs. Fen's specialty." Mrs. Fen retreated after serving the dishes. She hadn't expected Hua Xiaoheng to stay for dinner, so she didn't make much, just enough for Tan Guirin. Yangzhou cuisine was about small portions and many plates, so a table full of dishes could be eaten in one bite. Hua Xiaoheng was no stranger to Yangzhou cuisine. His grandmother was from the south, and when she was alive, they had a chef who specialized in Huayang cuisine. And Yangzhou cuisine was only one branch of Huayang cuisine. He picked up some lion's head with his chopsticks and tasted it. It was okay but not amazing. It was far worse than the Huayang chef he used to have at home. However, Hua Xiaoheng didn't say it out loud. He nodded lightly. Not bad. It was rare for Hua Xiaoheng to be complimented like this, and it was because he wanted to use Tan Guirin so he couldn't bear to do it. Tan Guirin didn't mind. She smiled brightly and kept putting food into his bowl. Mrs. Fen saw that Hua Xiaoheng only gave her a slight compliment and was a bit annoyed that he didn't know what was good, but she didn't show it. She brought out their food baskets and went down to eat. Hua Xiaoheng and Tan Guirin chatted casually. Dinner took almost an hour and it was almost 9 o'clock. Mrs. Fen put down their chopsticks and served them tea. Tan Guirin looked out the window to see that the rain hadn't stopped. It looked like Hua Xiaoheng wouldn't be leaving tonight. Tan Guirin suppressed her happiness and left the dining room to help Hua Xiaoheng decorate his room. Hua Xiaoheng chose a guest room on the first floor. Tan Guirin and Sister Fen both lived on the second floor, which was more convenient. Although Tan Guirin would have preferred Hua Xiaoheng to stay in the guest room on the second floor, Hua Xiaoheng had chosen the first floor. She did not want to go against his words at all. He had such an imposing manner. After 10 o'clock, the electricity still did not come. The diesel generator at home was not very functional. It lasted for 2 hours and was about to run out of gas. They had to save some oil for tomorrow. Thus, the 3 of them said goodnight and went back to their rooms to sleep. At midnight, Hua Xiaoheng opened his eyes and quietly got up. He slipped out of his room in a black t-shirt, a pair of black trousers and a pair of socks. First, he went to the living room to look for the bugs and pinhole cameras installed there. There was a picture frame above the fireplace in the living room. On the back of the picture frame were 4 black button-like buttons. They were originally used to prevent the picture from falling out, but one of the black buttons had been replaced with a bug. Hua Xiaoheng reached out to touch it and pulled the bug button off. Coming out of the living room, he followed the pitch-black hallway to the dining room he had just stayed in. A paper lotus chandelier hung from the ceiling of the dining room. The threads above the lampshade were very thick, and there were also some small threads hanging from the lampshade. And among those small threads, there was a tiny protrusion. That was the CIA's most advanced pinhole camera. Hua Xiaoheng was very tall. Standing under the dining table, he raised his hand to touch the top of the lotus chandelier and pulled the pinhole camera off. Then he went to the hallway on the second floor. The CIA had actually installed 4 or 5 bugs and pinhole cameras here. If Tan Dongbang really became the prime minister in the future and came to stay here for a short time, it would be really bad. The prime minister of a nation would be completely under someone else's surveillance. Hua Xiaoheng patiently removed all the bugs and pinhole cameras in the villa. He was not restricted by the information James had given him. Instead, he searched the entire villa from top to bottom again. He worked from dawn until dawn before packing up and returning to his room to sleep. He put all the bugs and pinhole cameras into a bag and smashed them into powder with a hammer. When he left tomorrow, he would throw the powder into the ocean. The CIA agents wouldn't make a fuss if they couldn't find the bugs and pinhole cameras. This wasn't something honorable or legal to begin with. Tan Guirin woke up in the morning to find that the rain had already stopped. She was a little annoyed. She slowly got up, dressed, and went to the bathroom to wash up. It took her almost an hour before she came out of her room. However, when she arrived at Hu Xiaoheng's guest room, she saw that it was Mrs. Fun who opened the door. Tan Guirin's eyes widened. "Where's that gentleman?" "He left a long time ago." Mrs. Fun had gone in to clean up. She said with a smile, "This gentleman is really clean. The room is so neat and tidy as if no one has ever lived here. He's a good person." Tan Guirin pushed the door open and found that Hu Xiaoheng was indeed gone. She was disappointed for a while before quietly leaving alone. However, she wasn't disappointed for long. 3 days later, when James came to visit her, Hu Xiaoheng actually came as well. The two of them seemed to have arranged to sit and talk in the gazebo in Tan Guirin's backyard. The backyard of the Tan's villa was very large, and the gazebo was in the middle of it. It was surrounded by flat, green grass that was at least an acre in size. It was impossible for anyone to hear them sitting in the gazebo with such a wide field of grass between them. Of course, there were no bugs in the gazebo. Hu Xiaoheng and James were both experts and had already checked. Tan Guirin sat in the living room on the first floor of the villa. She was preparing a fruit platter as she smiled at the two familiar figures in the gazebo in the distance through the bright floor-to-ceiling windows. She was very happy and excited to be able to provide convenience for these two people. She even felt a sense of holiness. In the gazebo, James and Hu Xiaoheng chatted for a while before getting to the main topic. "Gu, are you satisfied with my gift?" James asked with a smile. He held a pipe in his hand and put it in his mouth. The two of them had tacitly agreed to call each other Mr. J. "Jay, I think you're taking advantage of me." Hu Xiaoheng crossed his legs and leaned against the chair in the gazebo. He also had a cigarette in his hand, but he didn't smoke it. White smoke slowly rose from between his fingers and obscured his face. It was the second watch. Just a reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today was Monday, especially with the recommendation votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 6:15. Take advantage of you? No, how would I dare take advantage of you? Do I have a death wish? James calmly took his pipe out of his mouth and smiled. He flipped his hand to take out a thin envelope. "Didn't you want to find out who the mole in the country is? This should be able to help you." Hu Xiaoheng looked dubious as he took the envelope from James. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and opened it to read. James whispered, "These are the 3 departments of your country. I've tried my best to narrow the scope to these 3 places. That person should be in one of these 3 departments." Hu Xiaoheng hadn't expected this person to hide so well that even the director of the CIA's Asian Intelligence Division didn't know his or her true identity. He looked down and saw 3 English names printed on an old printer. Department of Internal Affairs, Department of Justice, Army General Hospital. Hu Xiaoheng's fingers tightened around the letter. These 3 places had indeed caught him off guard. The Minister of Internal Affairs, Bai Jianqing, and the Minister of Justice, Tan Dongbang, were popular candidates for Prime Minister, but the Military General Hospital was too subtle. Logically, the Military General Hospital had nothing to do with intelligence agencies, but because many of the people who came here for treatment were high-ranking military officers, and because the doctors from the Military General Hospital had the opportunity to visit the homes of military leaders, they had the opportunity to come into contact with many high-ranking people. Therefore, an unintentional leak could make the Military General Hospital a very good infiltration point. Also, although Hu Xiaoheng didn't have much contact with the Military General Hospital, he had a lot of contact with someone there. This person had also been transferred from the Military General Hospital to the Special Operations Forces. He was Chen Lai. Hu Xiaoheng thought about this in his mind. Although he really wanted to eliminate the possibility that it was Chen Lai, his years of professionalism taught him to consider all kinds of possibilities and then eliminate them one by one. He believed that Chen Lai wouldn't voluntarily leak the secret, but passively. Did this blabbermouth know when to shut his mouth? Hu Xiaoheng flicked the letter and said calmly, "These 3 departments? Isn't the scope too big? Jay, do you know how many people there are in these 3 departments?" You're asking me to find a needle in a haystack. Besides, what makes you say that the mole is in one of the 3 departments? He knew how to sow discord, and he believed that James was no stranger to it. He couldn't let him lead him by the nose. James smiled as he took out something else and passed it to Huo Xiaoheng. Look at this and you'll believe me. It was a newspaper clipping that contained copies of various internal CIA documents. They were all related to the Wuxia Empire's most well-hidden mole. From the information provided by the mole, he should be from one of the 3 departments. In modern society, when 2 countries clashed, military intelligence wasn't the only thing that mattered. Internal affairs, diplomacy, justice, and technology were all things that the other party coveted. Moreover, the higher one's position in each department, the more confidential the information they could access would be. Huo Xiaoheng held it in his hand and skimmed through it. He compared it with some of the intelligence information he knew and found that it matched very well. He couldn't help but tighten his grip on the clipping. Give it back to me. I can't let you take this away. James reached out to Huo Xiaoheng for the clipping. Huo Xiaoheng slowly closed it but refused to give it back. Jay, this is more interesting. Otherwise, you'd really be taking advantage of me. James couldn't do anything about his refusal. He became even more cautious and said quietly, "You have to keep this safe. If someone finds out, I won't be able to hide it anymore." Just like the Wuxia Empire's internal information provided by the mole exposed his background, James's clipping could also expose his identity in the CIA. To Huo Xiaoheng, this was another piece of leverage. It would be strange if he gave it up. I know. Don't worry, you won't be exposed even if I expose myself. Huo Xiaoheng smiled and casually held the clipping in his hand. He was so nonchalant. No one would have thought that this clipping would be so important. James saw that Huo Xiaoheng was much more experienced than him and sighed in relief. He put the pipe back in his mouth. That's good. What do you plan to do? Huo Xiaoheng flicked the ash. Seeing that the cigarette in his hand was almost burnt out, he casually pressed it into the ashtray. I have my ways, but I'll need your help next. Send me the information when the time comes, and I'll know exactly where that person is. He was most worried about either Bai Jianqing or Tan Dongbang. Both of them represented too much power. Even with General Ji's support, it would be very difficult to pull them off their positions. Also, once they were elected, it would be even more difficult to get rid of them. If one of them was the mole, then it would be a huge blow to the Wuxia Empire's national security. Long after James left, Huo Xiaoheng was still sitting in the gazebo and thinking about his next step. Now that the scope had been narrowed down to these 3 departments, he was both worried and relieved. He was worried that that person was too powerful, and the damage to national security would be incalculable. He was relieved that his special operations forces and the military had no major connections involved. His comrades around him hadn't betrayed him, so he had more confidence and confidence. Tan Guirin watched Huo Xiaoheng from afar for a long time. Seeing that he was sitting motionless like a statue, she didn't dare disturb him. It wasn't until she saw that the sky outside was darkening that she couldn't help but walk over and cough softly. Do you want some fruit? Huo Xiaoheng snapped out of his deep thought and stood up. No, I still have something to do. Thank you, Miss Tan. You don't have to call me Miss Tan. It sounds so distant. You're my savior, so you can just call me Cheryl. Tan Guirin blushed slightly and looked stunning under the sunset. You flatter me. That was my mission and my duty. Huo Xiaoheng took a step back. I'll be busy for a while, so I won't be here for a while. If that gentleman comes here again, tell him I have nothing to say to him and ask him not to come again. He had already achieved his goal of using Tan Guirin, so Huo Xiaoheng didn't want to come here to see James again. The 2 of them had to arrange a new time and place. Tan Guirin was a bit disappointed. What? Did you guys just fight? Yes. Did Miss Tan see everything? Huo Xiaoheng glanced at her silently. Please keep this a secret, Miss Tan. No one else can know about this. It was actually best to let others know. Unfortunately, Tan Guirin made up her mind again. Don't worry. I definitely won't let anyone know. Huo Xiaoheng said, Thank you for your understanding, Miss Tan. Tan Guirin was no longer useful to him, so Huo Xiaoheng didn't explain further. The rest of the matter was the same whether she was involved or not. He tapped his forehead with his hand and turned to leave. Tan Guirin restrained herself from sending him off. She only leaned against the door and bit her lower lip lightly as she watched his gradually disappearing silhouette. Mrs. Fan followed and smiled secretly when she saw Tan Guirin like this. Miss Tan's heart was finally moved. Huo Xiaoheng returned to his rented apartment in New Jersey and rested for 2 days to calm his emotions. Although he had been through a lot and very few things could shock him, the 3 departments that James had given him still put him in a difficult position. It wasn't that he didn't have a way, but the Special Operations Force's methods couldn't be used domestically. Even if there was a traitor, they couldn't act openly. Maintaining the security of domestic organizations was originally the Secret Service's mission. But now it seemed that the Secret Service wasn't completely united either. Wuxia estimated that if he could successfully return this time, he would have to promote the relationship between the United States CIA and FBI in the Wuxia Empire. The United States CIA was responsible for foreign intelligence, just like the Wuxia Empire's Special Operations Forces. However, the FBI was responsible for domestic security as well as criminal investigation and was responsible for supervising the CIA. Conversely, the CIA also had the function of supervising the FBI. The two monitored each other to ensure the purity of each other's teams and not be infiltrated by external forces. But in reality, the United States CIA was infiltrated like a sieve by external forces. However, they believed that offense is the best defense. So although there were often moles inside, as long as they repeatedly caused trouble abroad, the internal moles were almost negligible. It was only in the Wuxia Empire that they hadn't been able to cause trouble for so many years. They could only rely on the moles deep inside the Wuxia Empire to pass on information for them. The two agencies, the Special Operations Forces and the Secret Service, were bound to monitor each other in the future. Wuxia hung the towel around his neck and went to the apartment's gym. He always appeared here in disguise, such as a hooked nose and black-rimmed glasses. It was very easy to change a person's appearance. He was also good at disguise, so even if someone familiar saw him, it would take a while to recognize him. After sweating in the gym for an hour, he went to the pool to swim. Maintaining high-intensity training every day was his habit, and it was a very good habit. After sweating all over, he felt that his mind was much clearer. A person had to be very careful and meticulous to formulate a detailed plan to find the moles who betrayed him. Fortunately, with James as his inside man, the difficulty of this cat-and-mouse game was greatly reduced. Wuxia came out of the apartment's bathroom and had already thought of a plan. The next day he drove to the east, west, and north of New York City and found the cheapest and most inconspicuous apartment buildings. He used cash to rent an apartment with 1 bedroom and 1 living room for half a year. This was the first update. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. There would be an extra update at 7 p.m. Chapter 6:16. This kind of building could be rented on a monthly basis and didn't even need to sign the rental contract as long as the money was paid in advance. He bought some daily necessities and put them inside to make it look like he was staying there. 7 or 8 days had passed since he started his journey. Of course, he wouldn't stay in the 3 new places, but he would wander around and familiarize himself with the surroundings. Time passed quickly and it was soon the end of August. That day, Wuxia finally typed 3 letters on an old-fashioned typewriter. One was sent to Bai Jianqing's Ministry of Internal Affairs, one was sent to the Ministry of Justice, and one was sent to the Military General Hospital, addressed to Chen Lai. The 3 letters were sent from the 3 new apartments that Wuxia rented, which were the 3 post offices in the East, West, and North New York City. He knew that according to procedure, letters sent to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Justice had to go through the sending and receiving system first, then be registered in the mail room, and finally be sent to the recipient's office according to their name. This way there were more people in between. But although it seemed like a lot, the layers of people who passed through all needed to sign, so it was easy to trace. After the letters were sent, all that was left was to wait. The 3 letters were written in code asking for help. Most people wouldn't understand it, but a mole would definitely understand what was going on and then use the postal code on the letters to determine his location. 3 letters sent from 3 different locations, sent at different times and received at different times as well. It was very unlikely that there would be collusion between the 2 parties. After everything was done, Wuxia met with James again. This time they weren't near Tangairan's house, but on a boat on the Hudson River. Both of them pretended to be tourists, leisurely exchanging information among the silly foreign tourists holding little flags and wearing the same baseball caps. "Are you ready?" James wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses and had a big beard, looking like a Russian. "Ready. As soon as he finds out that the letter was written by me, he'll definitely inform you of my address and have you come to arrest him." Wuxia smiled and held a pair of binoculars, looking at the scenery of New York like a normal tourist. James nodded. "We'll move out when the time comes. Be careful." Hua Xiaoheng had already planned to leave New York for South America when the CIA agents from New York came to arrest him. He entered the United States with a fake identity and had to get out as soon as possible. Plus, he had been away for so long and hadn't contacted Gun Yanji. He missed her. He also sent her silk scarves. To confuse them, he used a French shipping address. Even if they discovered it, they wouldn't be able to find his exact location, so he wasn't worried about Gun Yanji leaking information. He sincerely hoped that he would be back by her birthday. But it was not for him to decide, it was for the mole, who was deep in their inner organization. In New York, no matter how much the CIA suspected him, he was still a high-ranking general representing the Wuxia Imperial Military as long as they didn't arrest him on the spot. I know what I'm doing. Hua Xiaoheng put down the binoculars nonchalantly, rubbed his eyes, put on his sunglasses and calmly left. The process he designed would be relatively long. From the time the letter reached the country, the person would see it, and then the action would be taken. It would take at least a month. If it was slow, it might even take half a year. The advantage was that it wouldn't involve other people, and the innocent wouldn't be harmed. The downside was, of course, that it might drag on for a long time. If the other party took action within a month or two, it meant that the other party was in a hurry. If it dragged on for half a year, then they would be extremely cautious and would be even harder to deal with. Fortunately, Hua Xiaoheng was a very patient person. No matter what the other party did, he could deal with it. It was nearing the end of August in the capital of the Wuxia Empire, and all primary and secondary schools were about to reopen. Ma Qiqi, who had just finished her internship, rode her bike and hummed a tune as she happily traversed B University's tree-lined path. Gun Yanji had been in Germany for almost a month and it had been great. Ma Qiqi had been following the case on Weibo and had even accessed the live stream of the trial that caused a sensation on social media in Germany. It was a pity that he didn't get to see Gun Yanji's heroic face against the rogue lawyer. He could only hear her voice. He didn't expect her English to be so good. It was like her mother tongue. And Professor He's German with a perfect Hanover accent was amazing. He returned to the dormitory, sat in his room and began to text Gun Yanji. The two of them had been in contact, but due to the time difference, they didn't spend much time together. Therefore he usually sent a simple message and the other person would see it the next day and reply. Love Meng Qiqi, dear little Gigi, good luck. The next day, Gun Yanji received Ma Qiqi's message and also replied. Remember now, got it? I will definitely work hard. At the same time, Hua Xiaoheng's 3 letters were slowly passing through the U.S. postal system. They were packed into sacks and transported to the Wuxia Empire. A week later, the mail room of the Wuxia Empire's Ministry of Internal Affairs received a letter from New York. It was clearly addressed to the Minister of Internal Affairs office, but it didn't specify the recipient. This type of letter was usually registered and sent to the relevant departments for various security procedures before finally being sent to the receiving department. A few days later, the Ministry of Justice also received a similar letter addressed to the Minister of Justice's office. Then a few days later, the mail room of the Military General Hospital received a letter addressed to Senior Colonel Military Dr. Chen Lai. Chen Lai's rank and position were both in the Military General Hospital. He was only seconded to the Special Operations Forces, and his assistant Yi Zieten was also seconded. Because Chen Lai was busy with work, Yi Zieten helped him take care of the daily affairs, including receiving and sending letters. It was almost September and Gun Yanji wanted to return to the empire. Ever since the third trial, the Munich District Court had made a fool of itself in front of the entire German people. It was difficult to offend the public, so they didn't dare to go too far. Therefore, Seth and Nina's murder case had been dragged on, and the verdict was delayed. He Jichu and his 4 American assistants were also busy setting up a branch in Germany. From legal documents to choosing the location of the office to finding people and buying office equipment, half a month passed quickly, and everyone was very busy. Only Gun Yanji wasn't considered an official employee of the American law firm yet, and she didn't care about the new branch. She was only interested in the lawsuit, so she couldn't help but feel annoyed. That day she was sitting in the garden behind the hotel reading a book. The late summer and early autumn sun shone through the ginkgo leaves, and the light shone like a small fan in front of her eyes. She squinted her eyes and couldn't focus on her book. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a middle-aged couple standing at the edge of the grass watching her. It was the second watch. A reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 617. Gunyenji quietly closed her book and slowly stood up. She looked up to see a middle-aged couple dressed in plain clothes standing on the edge of the grass. They looked at her with humble smiles and habitually bowed. Gunyenji's eyes flashed. She knew this couple. They were the parents of the murdered female exchange student, Li Haiqing. She stood up and brushed the grass and dirt off her body before walking towards them. Lawyer Gu. Li Haiqing's mother called her timidly. Her eyes were slightly timid, and her expression was both grateful and sad. She tried her best to maintain a calm posture. The couple looked at Gunyenji, who had bright eyes and white teeth. They could see a bit of admiration for her. Lawyer Gu was much younger than their daughter, but she was so capable. Gunyenji's eyes were a bit sore. She curled the corners of her lips and tried her best to smile to make the slightly uncomfortable couple relax. Uncle Andy, you're here. Come sit in my room. Gunyenji took the initiative to invite them. I'll treat you to dinner tonight. You're not used to the food here, right? German cuisine was considered one of the top dark cuisines in Europe. There wasn't much good food there. The couple shook their heads and looked at each other. Li Haiqing's parents were both in their 50s. Due to the recent torture of losing their daughter, they looked even older. No, we're here to talk to you, Li Haiqing's father said. Li Haiqing's father spoke. He looked at Gunyenji and suddenly bent down to bow to Gunyenji. It was an almost 90-degree bow. Gunyenji froze and quickly reached out to help the middle-aged man. She said anxiously, Uncle, what are you doing? Let's talk about it. I can't take it. No, you can take it. Li Haiqing's mother finally began to wipe away her tears. Our family is poor and can't afford a lawyer. Thank you, Lawyer Gu, for standing up for Haiqing. She's a good child, a good child. She's not the kind of girl who would mess around with men. Gunyenji tried her best to hold back the tears that almost fell. She spoke very slowly and calmly. Andy, don't feel burdened. They committed a crime and will be punished by the law. As for the lawyer's fees, don't worry. Not only will you not have to pay, but we will also fight for a large amount of civil compensation for you. Civil compensation? Li Haiqing's father shook his head. No need. No amount of money can buy back my daughter's life. I really regret it. I really regret it. Regret what? He probably regretted sending his daughter to study in Germany, Gunyenji argued eloquently in court, but she didn't know what to say to this simple middle-aged couple. It seemed that any words were so pale and powerless in the face of this kind of love between parents who only wished for the well-being of their children. It's not your fault and it's not Haiqing's fault. Gunyenji calmed down and raised her head. Her expression was solemn. It was those people who were crazy. They will definitely be punished by the law. At this point, Gunyenji remembered that the court had already delayed the verdict for half a month and refused to continue the trial. She quickly said, Don't worry, I'll urge the court to start the trial immediately. She thought that Li Haiqing's parents were here to ask her to hurry up with the court. Unexpectedly, Li Haiqing's parents shook their heads and said, We can see that the murderer's family is rich and powerful. We are very grateful that Lawyer Gu is not afraid of them and is willing to stand up for Haiqing. As they spoke, the couple bowed to Gunyenji again. Gunyenji was really embarrassed and mumbled as she took a step back. I feel even more guilty now that you're acting like this. Please don't misunderstand, Lawyer Gu. We really aren't here to rush you. Li Haiqing's mother sighed. Actually, we're here to say goodbye today. Goodbye. Gunyenji really didn't expect this reason. What? The trial isn't over yet, why are you leaving? We've already been out for almost a month. If we don't go back soon, we won't be able to keep our jobs. Li Haiqing's father said quietly, Also, we feel bad for using Director Bai's family's money. So we've already booked plane tickets to go back tomorrow. Gunyenji tried her best to make them stay, but the couple had already made up their minds. However, before they left, they were still convinced by Gunyenji and signed a letter of representation to represent them in the civil case. With this full representation, Gunyenji could immediately start the civil case. If the Munich District Court wants to delay the criminal case, fine, I'll give you something to do. Let's start the civil compensation process. Gunyenji sent Li Haiqing's parents off and returned to her hotel room to draft the civil compensation complaint. When He Jichu returned to the hotel that night, it was already midnight. When he passed by Gunyenji's door, he was slightly surprised to see light spilling out from the crack in the door. He knocked on her door. Yenji, you're still awake? Gunyenji got up from her computer and walked over to open the door. Professor, he is back? Yeah, why aren't you asleep yet? I'm preparing the civil lawsuit draft. Gunyenji rubbed her eyes. I'm almost done and will send it to Professor He for a look. Civil lawsuit. Hijichu frowned. Yeah, it's too late. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Gu Nianji's eyelids were starting to struggle. She covered her hands and yawned. Nodding at Hijichu, she closed the door. After working for another half an hour, she finally finished. She reread it and sent it to Hijichu's email before turning off her phone to sleep. She slept all the way until noon the next day. She woke up and picked up her phone to see the text from Li Haiqing's parents. They thanked her profusely and said they were about to board the plane. Gu Nianji yelped and looked at her watch. It had already been 2 hours since they sent the text. The plane must have already taken off. She wouldn't be able to see them off in time. But it didn't matter. Gu Nianji had done everything for them. They wouldn't care if she didn't see them off. Gu Nianji sat on the bed in a daze for a while before slowly getting up to wash up. When she was done, she looked at her phone again. There was still no message from Hijichu. She changed her clothes and went to knock on Hijichu's door. Hijichu opened the door for her and saw that she still looked sleepy. His lips curled into a faint smile. You're up? Have you had breakfast? Gu Nianji shook her head. Professor He, did you read the email I sent you yesterday? I'm reading it. Hijichu stepped aside. Come in and talk. Gu Nianji walked in and heard Hijichu order room service to send lunch over. The Michelin star restaurant he had ordered food from before was too full, so Hijichu didn't continue ordering food there. Now they were looking for other restaurants and didn't have a fixed location. If they were too busy, they could eat at the hotel. Gu Nianji had no appetite for anything now. She just wanted to fill her stomach. She sat down on the sofa across from Hijichu. Hijichu turned the computer to face her. You want to sue Nina, Seth's parents, the Roslao Regional Police Department, and the Roslao City Government? Yes. Suing them is the only way to get the most compensation and influence. Gu Nianji nodded. Suing Seth alone won't be of much use. Your goal for compensation is 1 billion euros? Hijichu laughed. That's quite an appetite. If I can't demand an exorbitant price, then what's the point of suing? Gu Nianji raised a brow. Also, in German law, there's no upper limit for punitive damages and civil claims. Look at the reasons I listed. Can they convince the court to accept the case? Hijichu read on slowly. Gu Nianji explained in the complaint why she wanted such a large amount of compensation. First, she explained how Li Haiqing's parents were struggling to support their child's studies. Their daughter's death caused a huge financial loss to the family, indicating that they needed financial support and assistance. Then she listed how Seth's brutality dealt a heavy psychological blow to the victim's parents. Finally, she emphasized the most important point. Seth's parents abused their power for personal gain and manipulated the Roslao Regional Police Department to attempt to neglect their duties, get away with it, and treat human life as grass. Not only was it unfair to the victim, Li Haiqing, but it was also unfair to her parents. It also caused great damage to society and the hearts of the people. The latter, in particular, was the basis for Gu Nianji to demand such a large amount of compensation. The case was so terrible that the Roslao Regional Police Department, as a law enforcement agency, knowingly broke the law. The Roslao city government, as a democratically elected government, disregarded the safety of the people in their jurisdiction. Moreover, the live broadcast of the trial had already caused public outrage. All of this could only be appeased by a heavy punishment. Hijichu thought about it for a moment before saying, Your first point emphasized the victim's parents' financial situation. It's better not to list it. What? Gu Nianji didn't understand and clenched her hands into a ball. She couldn't forget Li Haiqing's parents' old and helpless faces and their poor financial situation. Why can't I add it? Seth's actions did indeed harm the Li family's interests from an economic perspective. Nianji, the court is not a charity. Emphasizing the Li family's parents' financial situation will only backfire. Westerners think differently from Easterners. They won't sympathize with the Li family because of their poverty. Instead, they'll think they're using the opportunity to blackmail them, which will backfire. Gu Nianji really hadn't thought of that. As expected, international lawsuits were not easy to fight. No wonder law firms mostly commissioned local law firms to fight international lawsuits. It was because different countries had different cultural traditions, resulting in different legal habits and people's concerns. Hijichu deleted that reason from Gu Nianji's complaint and added another reason for her. Seth's father, York, and mother, Ramona, are high-ranking officers in the police department. They actively destroyed evidence and caused irreversible damage to the case. They acted as officers of the Roslao Regional Police Department, so the Roslao Regional Police Department is jointly and severally liable. Gu Nianji leaned over to take a look and said with complete admiration, "Professor, he is still more thoughtful than I am. This is the first update. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. There will be an extra update at 7 p.m. P.S. Regarding the plagiarism of Hello Major General, last time Chidian Girls Web has already posted a notice about the plagiarized book. There are more than 10 chapters that involve plagiarism. After blocking it, they asked her to delete the plagiarized parts. Hopefully, the country can improve the relevant laws and regulations to make it easier for the original author to protect their rights." Chapter 618. Punitive damages in civil lawsuits are usually targeted at cases with serious consequences and negative social impact. You focused on the key points, but in order to highlight the shared responsibility of Seth's parents, the local police department, and the municipal government, you have to emphasize that Seth's parents committed irreparable and even criminal acts in the criminal case. Ijichu explained to Gu Nianji like he was teaching a class. "Do you understand? Professor, he is still the best." Gu Nianji nodded obediently like a chick pecking at grains. Ijichu couldn't help ruffling her hair. "Stop flattering me. After lunch, reorganize the complaint and come to court with me to submit it." Gu Nianji giggled as she finished lunch at Hijichu's place and returned to her room to reorganize the complaint. An hour later, she finished the complaint and sent it to Hijichu for a final review. After he signed it, he took Gu Nianji to court personally. Before going, Hijichu used the name of his American law firm to have one of his assistants, Smith, call all the major German media outlets and say that the law firm would immediately represent Li Haiqing's parents to file a joint civil claim against Nina, Seth's parents, the Dessau Regional Police Department, and the Dessau government. The amount would be kept secret for now. After the Munich District Court deliberately cooled down and delayed, the case became a hot topic on social media for a while before slowly dying down because there was no follow-up development. This was exactly what Seth's parents wanted to see. As long as the public stopped paying attention to the case, it would be easier for them to play tricks. They didn't expect Hijichu's call to Smith to cause such a stir and cause the German media to explode again. This was almost breaking news in Germany. All of a sudden, all the major German media outlets stopped their normal broadcasts and sent out live interview teams to broadcast the filing of the civil lawsuit. Li Haiqing's case was once again brought up for the audience to explain to them that the Munich District Court was still considering the case and hadn't announced a verdict yet. The media moved too quickly. Hijichu's business car hadn't even arrived at the Munich District Court when the media's cameras were already set up in front of the courthouse. The weather was fine that day, and the sun wasn't as strong at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. When the wind blew, it was even a bit cool. The reporter's cameras showed a low-key black business car coming from the other side of the street and stopping in front of the Munich District Court. The car door opened and a tall, handsome man in a black Armani suit and sunglasses stepped out of the car. It was Hijichu, one of the partners of the American law firm that everyone was already familiar with. After he got out, he immediately turned around and reached his hand into the car. A woman grabbed his arm and jumped out of the car. Although she was wearing sunglasses, people still recognized her. She was Hijichu's only female assistant this time. She was also Gu Nianji, who had appeared in court to argue during the third trial. The reporters immediately swarmed over, and countless microphones and recording pens were handed to Hijichu and Gu Nianji. "Lawyer He, may I ask why you are requesting civil compensation from the Dessau Regional Police Department and the municipal government? Lawyer Gu, will you also be appearing in court for the civil compensation case? Lawyer He, may I know how much you claim in civil cases?" He couldn't wait to throw out one question after another, waiting for Hijichu and Gu Nianji to answer. Gu Nianji received Hijichu's signal and spoke in English first. "We are requesting civil compensation from the Dessau Regional Police Department and the municipal government because they neglected their duties and intentionally allowed the criminal to destroy evidence, causing irreparable damage and harm to my victim." The German reporters all understood English, so everyone immediately translated her words into German and sent the live video back to their own media outlets. Hijichu looked around and said coolly in German, "This time, we are requesting compensation from the two defendants, as well as Seth's parents, York and Ramona, the Dessau Regional Police Department and the municipal government. It is a total of 1 billion euros. What? The crowd of reporters froze when they heard Hijichu's words. They almost thought they didn't understand German. Did I hear that right? Yes, is it 1 billion euros? Yes, yes, yes. I also heard it was 1 billion euros. Everyone looked at He Jichu and Gu Nianji in unison to confirm again. The compensation is really 1 billion euros? You didn't hear wrong, He Jichu said as he walked straight to the court. Gu Nianji followed closely behind, feeling very emotional. As expected, a huge compensation was big news. If the compensation was too small, she would be too embarrassed to face the reporters. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she calmly walked to the steps of the court building. It took less than 10 minutes for her to submit the complaint inside the court, but Gu Nianji thought of many things. Huge civil claims were very common in Western countries. They served as punishment and deterrence so that the stronger party would not dare to do anything to harm the weaker party. Especially when an individual was the weaker party and sued a government agency or large corporation, the chances of winning were very high. For example, the famous McDonald's hot coffee case of the last century. An old woman was scalded by McDonald's hot coffee. Although she only stayed in the hospital for 3 days, she still sued McDonald's for millions of dollars in compensation and won. That was the power of punitive damages and civil lawsuits. Gu Nianji hoped that this exorbitant civil compensation would not only attract a new round of attention from the media and the public, but also prepare for losing the criminal case. She already sensed that due to the lack of direct evidence and the court's bias towards the defendant, they would most likely lose the criminal case. Although they would definitely continue to appeal, Gu Nianji could currently use the public's anger from losing the criminal case to make their civil case go more smoothly. To be honest, because Germany didn't have the death penalty, Gu Nianji would never be satisfied with the criminal case's outcome no matter how it was judged. Therefore, only a huge compensation in a civil case would let the other party know what it meant to feel real pain. Because the media's attention was too high, and after He Jichu submitted the complaint to the court, he published it online. Because of this, the Munich District Court had no choice but to accept the case. This was because countless law experts and high-ranking political officials were watching the case. No matter how powerful Seth's stepfather York was, he could only do whatever he wanted in Dessau. His hand was not big enough to completely cover all of Germany. It was the second watch. Just a reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 619. Early the next morning, Gu Nianji received news from He Jichu that their civil claim case had been filed and would be scheduled for trial. Due to the high profile of the case, the Munich District Court gave a very close schedule. In 2 weeks, the civil case would be heard. What about criminal cases? The results of the first trial were not out yet. Due to the new interest in their huge civil compensation case, the case once again attracted everyone's attention. The Munich District Court, which had delayed announcing the results of the first trial, was in a delicate situation. What? 1 billion euros. Why don't they just rob someone? Seth slammed the table in the detention center's small room and yelled. In front of him sat his mother, Ramona. Her eyes were hazy, and on her high cheekbones were 2 lumps of red. Her face, which looked like cooked meat, was fierce and tough. There's nothing we can do. They've notified the media, so the court can't reject the case. Ramona was impatient and paced around the room with her arms crossed. They filed a case. Then aren't we? Seth was flabbergasted. Clenching his large hands into fists, he punched the air. Is it still that B*TCH lawyer? He's from the same country as the dead man? Of course. That woman is vicious and merciless, she won't bend the rules. Ramona's expression became even more gloomy. Your stepfather once sent someone to tell her that he wanted to negotiate with her and that it would be best if they could settle out of court, but she said, what did she say? Seth furrowed his brows tightly, his scarlet tongue sticking out to lick the dry corners of his lips. After being locked up in the detention center for more than a month, he was almost driven crazy. Not to mention the lack of good food, he didn't even have a woman. Ever since he was 14 years old, he couldn't live without a woman. She said that it's a pity that Germany doesn't have the death penalty. No matter how you're sentenced, it's too light. Ramona clenched her fists and twitched the corner of her mouth. She wants you to die to pay for that dead person's life. Bah! How dare she? Seth stood up angrily. I don't care. Let me out. I can't take it anymore. I don't want to go to jail. Don't spend the rest of your life in prison. Ramona's face was covered in tears. Seeing her beloved son, her only son, like this, she was heartbroken. Wait, your stepfather and I are trying to think of a way. Hurry up. This place isn't meant for humans. Seth yelled as he was finally brought back to his original room and locked up by the detention center police. When Ramona returned home, she saw her husband sitting in the room with a gloomy face, drinking alone. "York, think of a way. If we let them keep suing us, it won't be good for us," Ramona pleaded as she tugged on York's sleeve. York pushed her away and said with red eyes, "That son of yours has caused so much trouble since he was young. I told you to discipline him, but you wouldn't listen. He had finally stirred up a huge disaster. A murder case. Do you think it's that easy to settle? What's wrong? Didn't the judge agree?" Ramona froze for a moment, then went forward and hugged York's arm. "He raised 500,000 euros in one go for his campaign fundraiser. Is he still not satisfied? Humph. At this time, of course, we have to raise the price." York slammed his glass heavily on the bar counter. "I went to see him today, but he was completely ambiguous and vague. All the money from before has been fed to the dogs. But we have to rely on him for this." Ramona thought for a while, then pouted. York helped Seth think of a way. "Just treat it as helping me." York drank a glass of wine, and his expression became even gloomier. At this time, it was no longer a question of whether or not to help his stepson. It was a question of whether his face, his prestige, and whether it could be sustained. He didn't care about Ramona's good-for-nothing son at all. Although he had committed many crimes in the past, to him, it was as easy as opening his mouth and lifting a finger. This time, however, it was so troublesome. Did he regret it? Perhaps a little. He should have thrown this good-for-nothing out earlier. But now that things had come to this, if he couldn't protect this cheap son of his, he wouldn't be able to survive in Roslaw anymore. Those people who bowed to the high and belittled the low would look down on him from now on. He might not be elected as a city councilor anymore, and his position as a police chief would definitely be doomed. So at this time, protecting this good-for-nothing Seth was to protect his own position. In any case, his hands were already wet and couldn't be clean anymore. Since that was the case, don't blame him for being ruthless. York downed the rest of the wine in one gulp and picked up his sunglasses and hat. "I'm going out for a while. Sleep early." Ramona's expression softened. She knew that York was going to think of a way. York went out for a spin but didn't go to the court's detention center to see Seth. Instead, he called a few of his former subordinates who were now working as bailiffs in the Munich district court. The few of them gathered at the bar and drank the best wine. Their eyes glanced at the beautiful women who were alone in the bar, and they laughed happily as they talked about the tumultuous times in Roslaw. York had a pipe in his mouth and was also laughing, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze was cold. The lights in the bar were dim, and the women with their white breasts and thighs were like sparkling light bulbs, attracting the men's gazes like moths to a flame. York quietly took out a few envelopes and handed one to each of them. "Same rules. Everyone has a share." York's eyes were half closed and he didn't move. His hand was on the sofa's armrest and he tapped it every now and then. The few of them weighed the envelopes in their hands. The thickness made them overjoyed. Germany had high taxes, and as civil servants 60% of their salaries had to be taxed. Under these circumstances, York, who could give them cash support from time to time, was even more valuable. Everyone put the envelopes away and drank a few more glasses of wine before one of his former subordinates whispered, "Boss, is there anything we can help with?" They understood that they didn't deserve it. It wasn't the first time anyway, so they didn't care. It was just that the media was watching them closely, so it wouldn't be that easy for them to do anything. York took the pipe out of his mouth and smiled. "It's just a small matter. I won't make things difficult for you." The few of them looked at each other, somewhat frightened by this small matter. Did Mr. York ever ask for a small matter? Everyone looked at York anxiously. York sighed and stroked his natural curly hair with one hand. "This stepson of mine is indeed a good-for-nothing. I'm very sad that he did such a thing. So, I hope that you can find someone to beat him up in the detention center." With that, he looked at the bailiffs with a meaningful look. "Huh? Beat him up? Boss, are you serious? We've been treating Seth pretty well. No one dares to touch him in the detention center." York reached out and stopped them from continuing. With a serious expression he said, "Really, find someone to beat him up. It's best if he gets sent to the hospital." The moment he said that, the prison guards instantly understood. This was too easy. Getting beaten up in the detention center was a common occurrence. Previously, with their protection, Seth hadn't suffered at all. But now, although they had to beat him up, everyone knew that they wouldn't really hurt him. This money was too easy to earn. They rubbed their hands and said excitedly, "Boss, don't worry. We'll definitely find someone to beat Seth up." He emphasized the word beat, and everyone knew what it meant. A few days later, there was a sudden riot in the detention center of the Munich District Court. A few suspects who were locked up suddenly got into a fight while they were on their way out. At the time, the bailiffs guarding them had just gone for lunch, so the transfer didn't arrive in time. Thus, the fight escalated from a few people verbally provoking each other to a group fight. The burly Seth was pinned to the ground and beaten up so badly that he almost fainted. When the prison guards found out, there were already a few suspects lying motionless on the ground. Beep. The bailiffs blew their whistles, and a group of riot police with stun batons rushed in to pull the people who were fighting apart. In the open space of the detention center, there were a few unconscious people lying on the ground. "Call an ambulance," a bailiff ordered sternly. "These people are seriously injured and must be sent to the hospital." Soon, the ambulance's emergency siren sounded outside the courthouse. Several bailiffs carried stretchers and sent the unconscious suspects to the ambulance. The ambulance screamed all the way and quickly arrived at the Munich District Hospital. The media that had been watching the courthouse all this while heard the news and scrambled to report it. The news of Seth being seriously injured and sent to the hospital for emergency treatment was also widely publicized by the TV stations. Many people felt that he deserved it and that this kind of person should stay in prison and be beaten up by felons. Gu Nianji also saw the news on the local Munich TV station. She had nothing to do recently and was learning German by turning on the TV every day. She would watch the news whenever she had time, so her listening skills improved quickly and she could already understand some basic German conversations. This time, when she saw the footage of the Munich District Court, she quickly focused on it and even used the translator to compare to see if she understood. It had to be said that people with good memory could learn languages with half the effort. When she saw that Seth was also hospitalized from a fight, Gu Nianji laughed and quickly called Hijichu. "Professor He?" Hijichu was reading in his room when he saw Gu Nianji call him. He raised a brow and swiped his phone to answer. "What is it?" "Professor He, did you watch the TV? I saw the Munich District Court on TV." Gu Nianji sat cross-legged on the sofa with one hand on her phone and the other on her iPad. She was playing games. Hijichu turned on the TV to take a look and frowned slightly. There was a fight at the Munich District Court, and Seth was seriously injured and hospitalized? Hijichu said dryly. "Looks like we have to go to the hospital tomorrow." This was the first update. A reminder to everyone about your monthly votes and recommendation votes. Chapter 620. Gu Nianji almost laughed out loud on the other end of the phone. She said briskly, "He deserves it. This kind of scum should be punished like this." "You think he deserves to be beaten?" "Of course." Gu Nianji raised a leg from the sofa and kicked it twice in the air. "If I were there, I would definitely kick him a few times." Hijichu smiled faintly. "It would be great if he really got beaten." How could it not be true? Gu Nianji's smile disappeared. "No way? Are they trying to escape punishment with serious injuries?" "I don't know. We'll know when we see him tomorrow." Hijichu said dryly. "The media is already waiting at the hospital entrance. It won't be easy for them to bail him out with serious injuries." "Bail him out with serious injuries?" Gu Nianji was shocked. "That's impossible unless he's so seriously injured he can't move." "Yeah, that's why I said I'll go to the hospital tomorrow." Hijichu hung up. Not long after he put down his phone, it rang again. This time it was from his hometown. He was a bit surprised and picked it up. "Auntie Chin?" It was actually Auntie Chin. "Chu, your father didn't want me to tell you, but I feel like I can't hide it from you." Auntie Chin's voice trembled as she tried to hide her sobs. Your father fell in the garden yesterday, and the back of his head hit a small rock on the ground. He fainted and woke up this afternoon. He's very weak now." Hijichu stood up immediately, his face pale. "Hit the back of his head. Is it serious?" "Little Dr. Chin said there's a blood clot in the back of your father's head. They're discussing whether or not to operate on him." Auntie Chin's voice slowly calmed down. "Chu, do you want to come back and see him?" Hijichu looked at his schedule. The next few days were filled with matters for the branch office. He could let the 4 lawyers work together on the recruitment. He had already signed all the legal documents that needed to be signed. Li Haiqing's civil case had just been submitted today, and there were still 2 weeks until the court hearing, so he should have time to go back. Hijichu sat upright on the sofa and couldn't speak for a long time. He had never been close to his father, but regardless, he was his father. He couldn't let go of Mr. He's accident. "Are you still listening?" Auntie Chin didn't hear Hijichu's voice for a long time, so she couldn't help but mutter, "You should come back. Ever since your mother passed away, you've been the most important person in your father's heart. Although he never says it, I know what he's thinking. No one is more important than you. Just, forgive your father?" Hijichu still didn't speak, but the hand hanging by his side quietly clenched. "Achu, I suspect." Auntie Chin stuttered, unable to say a word. Hijichu finally asked, "Suspect what?" "I suspect that your father doesn't want to live anymore and wants to follow your mother." Auntie Chin's voice was very, very low, as if she was afraid others would hear her. She covered the microphone. "It's not the first time I found out that he was sick and never took his medicine. When I asked him, he said he forgot. Now he fell like this just by taking a stroll in the garden. Tell me, how is this possible? No one has ever broken his back. With so many people following him, how did he fall like this? Could someone be trying to harm him?" Hijichu calmed down and walked to the window. Opening the curtains, he stared at the night sky of Munich. His eyes were dark and darker than the night. "You think that's possible? Then you have to come back and investigate personally. I can't handle these outside matters." Auntie Chin's voice grew panicked. "There's no other man at home right now. Achu, come back for a while. I'm very worried." Hijichu closed his eyes and pinched the spot between his brows. After some thought, he said, "I'll leave right away." Auntie Chin sighed deeply, obviously relieved. "Achu, it's great that you can come back. I really can't take it anymore." "It's okay." Hijichu comforted Auntie Chin and hung up. He immediately checked the flight information and found that there was a flight to New York at 1 a.m. After booking the first-class ticket, Hijichu thought over the matter at hand again and called Gu Nianji. "Nianji, come here. I have something to tell you." Gu Nianji had just put on a face mask and was lying on the bed studying the German dictionary. "Oh, is it really something important? I'm going to sleep. Can we talk tomorrow?" She was drowsy from reading and couldn't help yawning. "No." Hijichu said dryly, "Come here quickly. Don't be lazy." Gu Nianji made a face and climbed out of bed. Changing out of her nightgown, she put on casual clothes and walked to knock on Hijichu's door in slippers. Hijichu opened the door to let her in. Seeing that her face mask was still on, he glanced at her dryly. "You can sleep like that?" He exposed Gu Nianji's lie. Gu Nianji wasn't embarrassed and smiled mischievously. "I can sleep after I take it off. It's very convenient. I don't need to wash it." Hijichu walked back to the coffee table and took out the schedule he had been looking at. He handed it to Gu Nianji. "This is my schedule for the next 2 weeks and the case progress schedule. Take it." Gu Nianji froze and took the 2 forms from Hijichu's hands to look at them. She took off her face mask and threw it into the trash can. She turned to look at Hijichu. Under the chandelier, her skin, which had just been put on a face mask, was full of water. It was white, tender, and bouncy like the finest white jade tofu, but it also had the gentle texture of suet jade. A pair of black eyes stared at him intently. "Professor He, what do you mean by this? Something happened to my father. I have to go back to see him immediately." Hijichu said it casually, but Gu Nianji could tell from his tightly clenched right hand that something was up. It probably wasn't a small matter. Gu Nianji stopped smiling and nodded seriously. "Family matters. Professor He, don't worry about us. My 4 colleagues and I will work hard and not embarrass you." Hijichu walked to her side and looked at her steadily. His gaze was deep and vast. It was like a starry night with a black hole hidden in it. Not only was it boundless, but it was also bottomless. Gu Nianji didn't dare look him in the eye. She instinctively looked away. "Professor He, do you have any other instructions?" Hijichu's Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He gulped and swallowed his words. He rubbed Gu Nianji's head with his hand. "Okay, it's fine. If there's something, discuss it with your colleagues. If you can't come to a decision, delay it and wait for me to come back." Gu Nianji nodded heavily. She felt the heavy responsibility on her shoulders. However, the growth of a person came from the continuous increase in responsibility. She had been in Germany for more than a month and was much more mature than when she was in school. It was the second watch. A reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 621. I'll be back as soon as possible. Hijichu frowned, remembering that he had just said he would go to the hospital tomorrow to confirm Seth's condition. He couldn't go now. Gu Nianji hugged Hijichu's schedule and case progress chart and looked up at him. His shimmering, sultry eyes lost their cool coldness and were replaced with anxiety and guilt. Gu Nianji bit her lip. Professor, he was still worried about his father, wasn't he? What had happened? Hijichu didn't want to say, so she nodded obediently. I'll go to the hospital with Smith tomorrow to check on Seth's condition. Don't worry, Professor Hijichu curled his lips and forced a smile. I'm not worried that he won't get along well with you. Hijichu seemed to have returned to his usual tone, and Gu Nianji couldn't quite grasp what he meant. He seemed to be complimenting her, but it could also be sarcastic. Hijichu used to like to speak sarcastically, but he had gotten better recently. Was it because he was so worried about his father that he was showing his true colors and appearing harsh? It didn't matter. Gu Nianji magnanimously forgave him in her heart. Her parents were the most important thing in the world. Although Gu Nianji couldn't remember what her parents looked like, she could understand other people's feelings for their parents. Professor you're leaving tonight. Have you bought a plane ticket? Gu Nianji changed the topic and glanced around Hijichu's suite. She didn't see him packing his suitcase. Hijichu nodded slightly. I've already booked a ticket. The plane leaves at 1 a.m. He looked at his watch. There's still 3 hours. Why are you in such a hurry? Gu Nianji was surprised. Aren't you going to have your private plane pick you up? From Gu Nianji's perspective, Hijichu should be taking his private plane home. Hijichu looked down at her, his shimmering, sultry eyes sparkling. It's too slow for them to pick me up. It'll take 7 to 8 hours to fly here. I can't wait. Gu Nianji nodded. I understand. Professor is your father sick? Otherwise, why would he be in such a hurry and not even wait for his private plane? Yeah. I heard he was injured yesterday and only woke up today. Hijichu suppressed his anxiety. He might need surgery. The family can't decide. I have to go. Professor don't worry. Your father will be fine. Gu Nianji composed herself and comforted him softly. If something really happened, your family would have notified you yesterday, right? Hijichu was taken aback. He actually felt that Gu Nianji's words made sense, but he quickly pursed his lips. He didn't dare take the risk. Hijichu placed a hand on Gu Nianji's shoulder. He didn't use much strength, but it was very light. Gu Nianji didn't notice anything strange at all. Nianji, are you willing to go back with me? Hijichu's voice was still cold and indifferent, but that was only on the surface. It was like a volcano covered in snow. It was ice on the outside, but it was so hot inside that it was about to explode. Gu Nianji hadn't expected Hijichu to invite her to his home. She scratched her head and couldn't refuse him outright, so she smiled sheepishly and said, Professor how could I? Your family should be in a state of anxiety right now. Why should I go and add to the chaos? Besides, I don't want to go anywhere until the lawsuit is over. Hijichu withdrew his hand and smiled awkwardly. He hadn't expected Gu Nianji to agree to go home with him right now, but he couldn't help it. Actually, even if she agreed, he couldn't take her home now. It wasn't time yet. Because of this sudden topic, Hijichu and Gu Nianji both fell silent. No one spoke for a while. Gu Nianji felt an indescribable awkwardness in the air. She coughed softly to clear her throat. Hijichu quickly changed the topic. Yeah, school's about to start. I'll tell the school to give you internship credits. Hijichu knew that Gu Nianji took this case very seriously. She was already a master's student in the Faculty of Law, so fighting a lawsuit was good training. It was more justifiable than working as an intern at a law firm. Thank you, Professor Gu Nianji's eyes lit up with joy. She was worried and didn't want to go back to school. She wanted to finish the case and see Seth sentenced to life in prison to vent her anger. Hijichu patted her shoulder. Go back to sleep. We'll have to rely on you and your colleagues from now on. Gu Nianji bowed deeply to Hijichu. Professor don't worry. I'll do my best to win these 2 cases. I believe you. Go back to sleep now. Hijichu turned to go back to his bedroom. Gu Nianji said to his back, Professor let me take you to the airport. No need. Hijichu walked in without looking back. I still have to talk to the other 4 people. Go back to your room. Gu Nianji could only reply with an okay, and carry the 2 forms back to her room. Hijichu only called the other 4 assistants to tell them that he had an emergency at home and had to rush back overnight. He told them to discuss something with Gu Nianji and get through the case. If it didn't work out, they would try to delay the case and wait for him to return. Hijichu estimated that he would be back for 2 weeks at most. If he was fast, he could be back in a week. He would definitely be able to make it before the civil case, so he didn't say anything. The assistants didn't mind. They were all independent lawyers in the United States, but Hijichu was better than them, so they became his assistants. If it was a one-on-one case, they were also good lawyers. Gu Nianji returned to her room and changed into her pajamas. She climbed into bed and silently read the German legal articles for a while. She was so tired she couldn't open her eyes before falling asleep. Before she fell asleep, she looked out the window. The blinds weren't down, so she could see the starry sky outside. The stars twinkled in the dark blue sky, and occasionally a small red dot appeared. It was a plane flying at night. Gu Nianji squinted at it for a while and wondered if that was Professor He's plane. Just as she was worrying about Hijichu's family, Gu Nianji felt her eyelids grow heavier, and she slowly fell asleep. At the Munich Regional Hospital, Ramona's eyes were swollen from crying as she waited outside the operating room. Her bruised and swollen son, Seth, was inside receiving first aid. Several tall police officers stood at the door, expressionless and motionless. This was the treatment for serious criminals. Although Seth's case hadn't been concluded yet, the negative impact meant that he would be heavily guarded wherever he was. Gu Nianji woke up the next day to discover it was already past 9 in the morning. Hijichu had been calling her at 7 every morning recently to wake her up and have breakfast with her. She was already used to it. No one woke her up today, so she actually overslept. Luckily, she didn't need to go to court today. Gu Nianji sat up in bed and thought that habit was a scary thing. After washing up, she went to the dining room in the lobby for breakfast. Halfway there, she called Smith to ask when it was convenient for him to go to the hospital to check on Seth. Hijichu had already told Smith about this the day before. Smith's lazy voice came from the phone. "Gu, have you had breakfast? If you have, we can leave now." He had woken up a long time ago. Recently, he had been running between the law firm branch and the hotel. He was almost twice as busy as other people, so he was used to sleeping late and waking up early. Gu Nianji quickly said, "I just finished eating. Shall we leave now?" "Okay, where are you?" Smith picked up his briefcase. "I'm going to the hospital first, then to the branch. What about you?" Gu Nianji thought about it and unconsciously stirred the spoon in her coffee cup. "I'm going to the hospital first, then come back and organize the recent court records." Smith nodded and thought to himself that she was indeed a very hard-working and smart student. No wonder Professor He cherished her so much. As they spoke, Smith had already arrived at the dining room downstairs and saw Gu Nianji stand up from the table. She was wearing a heavy navy blue silk dress with split sleeves that revealed her delicate white arms. On her left wrist was a nondescript watch. However, Smith was also from an old family in the United States known as Old Money, so he had seen many good things. He was attracted to her watch with just one glance. It was a simple and elegant design, but the details were exquisite and luxurious. It was obvious that it was a custom-made watch that couldn't be bought with money. When he walked closer, he saw that it was Bulgari, the king of mechanical watches. He froze. Since when did Bulgari have a custom-made watch? When he looked at Gu Nianji again, the look in his eyes changed. Compared to his casual teasing before, there was now a hint of careful friendliness. It gave off a completely different vibe. Gu Nianji was also a smart person. When Smith walked over and glanced at her wrist, his attitude completely changed. She saw it clearly but didn't say anything. She acted like she didn't know. She carried her Chanel Luboy bag and wore a large, wide-brimmed sun hat with a net. She smiled faintly as she walked beside Smith. They continued to talk quietly, but Smith became even more respectful towards her. He maintained his composure. When they walked out of the hotel, Smith called for their private car to take them directly to the Munich Regional Hospital. The hospital was located in an old castle. It had a pointed tower and small windows. White curtains covered half of the windows. Every window had a small flower bed with rose red and bright purple morning glories, which covered the entire windowsill. Gu Nianji got out of the car and squinted at the castle-like hospital in front of her. She laughed lightly. "How old is this hospital? The color is a bit eerie." Moss grew at the bottom of the mottled stone walls, and even the steps were in their original state. Smith searched on his phone. "This castle has a history of over 200 years, but it's only been a hospital for a few decades. It was completely renovated in the last decade, so the inside should be no different from other hospitals." This was the first update. A reminder to everyone about your monthly and recommendation votes. Chapter 622. Gu Nianji looked up at the densely packed small windows. Every single one looked like a prison. She nodded and followed Smith through the hospital doors. He showed his ID at the information counter at the door and asked for Seth's room number. Seth is on the 3rd floor, room 147. A chubby nurse handed the visitor's pass to Smith. Smith was a rare blonde and blue-eyed handsome man. He winked at the chubby nurse, who looked like she was about to faint, and happily pointed to the elevator. Gunyenji shook her head with a smile and turned to walk up the stairs with Smith. It was only the 3rd floor, so they didn't need to take the elevator. As soon as they reached the hallway on the 3rd floor, Seth's parents, York and Ramona, walked toward them. Smith and Gunyenji both stopped. Ramona was furious as soon as she saw them. "What are you doing here? My son was almost beaten to death. Are you happy now? Satisfied?" Foreigners really had unreasonable double standards. Gunyenji silently cursed them. She stood to the side and didn't say a word. She left the situation to Smith. Smith was also a very humorous person, and he hated scum like Seth to the core. He shrugged exaggeratedly and spread his hands. "He didn't die? What a shame." Gunyenji burst out laughing and her shoulders shook. She quickly averted her gaze so she wouldn't be embarrassed to see Ramona's angry expression and laugh like a female toad. Perhaps it was Smith's blonde appearance that kept Ramona and York from acting rashly, but they couldn't stand seeing Gunyenji laugh uncontrollably. "What are you laughing at? You still have the face to laugh. If anything happens to my son." Ramona glared at Gunyenji. Her huge body was as heavy as 4 Gunyenjis. She walked over with pressure that couldn't be underestimated. Gunyenji covered her mouth with the back of her hand to clear her throat and stop laughing. She looked at the aggressive Ramona again, and her expression had already cooled. Her clear voice was the same as Hijichu's. "What do you want? Are you threatening the lawyer? Fine, bring it on." Gunyenji raised her hand and waved her phone at Ramona. "Did you see this? Now let's start the video recording. Everything you say will be used as evidence in court to prove that you threatened the lawyer. If anything happens to me, you'll be the first suspect." Ramona was so angry that her entire body was shaking. Her face, which was already red, turned purple, as if all the blood in her body had rushed to her face. You. She pointed a trembling finger at Gunyenji, but she was frightened by her phone and didn't dare to speak again. Not far behind them, a few police officers heard the commotion and looked over. York furrowed his brows tightly. He grabbed Ramona's wrist and pulled her away. Gunyenji turned sideways and glanced at the couple through the veil of her sun hat. At that moment, York happened to turn around. His gloomy eyes were like a venomous snake's as he looked at Gunyenji. Gunyenji narrowed her eyes and snorted softly. Turning around, she walked to Seth's room with Smith. When they arrived at the door of Seth's room, Smith showed his ID and the visitor pass the nurse had given him. He said elegantly in German, "We are the plaintiff's lawyers. The defendant was beaten and hospitalized. This is a serious matter, so we have to investigate it." This was permitted by law. The 2 police officers guarding the room didn't have a good impression of Seth, so they didn't stop them at all. They pushed open the door and let Smith and Gunyenji in. Gunyenji followed Smith into Seth's room. Although the hospital building was an old castle, the room's interior was no different from that of a normal hospital. White hospital beds, clean equipment, and elegantly designed sofas, tables, and chairs. It was a very high-standard room. Unfortunately, the patient lying on the bed was filthy inside and out. Smith stood in front of Seth's bed and looked at his condition. Seth's eyes were closed and both his hands were cuffed to the bed. His face was bruised and swollen, and his forehead was wrapped in gauze. One of his legs was in a splint. Gunyenji slowly moved over to look at Seth's suspended leg. "What's wrong with his leg?" The nurse who came to change the dressing said in broken English. "Fracture." "Really?" Gunyenji wanted to ask someone to remove the splint to take a look, but seeing the nurse's cautious expression, she didn't make such an unreasonable request. Instead, she clenched her fist and viciously punched Seth's suspended leg. Seth screamed and opened his eyes to start cursing. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was covered in a beard that hadn't been shaved for many days. He looked like a wild man and was somewhat frightening. Smith quickly shielded Gunyenji behind him. The nurse walked over to look at the splint on Seth's leg. After making sure it was fine, she said to Gunyenji stiffly, "The patient needs rest. Please leave his room." Gunyenji was worried that Seth was faking an injury to avoid legal punishment, so she had purposely tested to see if his leg injury was real. A simple knock was enough to make him hurt like a pig being slaughtered, so it was probably real. Gunyenji didn't think that Seth, who was as simple-minded as a single-celled paramecium, could fake it so well. Although she had confirmed that Seth's injury wasn't fake, Gunyenji was still a bit upset at the nurse's scolding. In her heart, criminals like Seth had no human rights. She didn't want to treat him like a human because he didn't treat others like humans. When he tortured and killed Li Haiqing, the pain was 100 times worse than Gunyenji's knock on his injured leg. As expected, he was the only one who could torture and kill others, and he would cry when someone touched a finger of his. This kind of double standard deserved to die. Gunyenji became stubborn and said coldly to the nurse, "The lawyer has something to ask the doctor. Please ask your attending doctor to come out." The nurse was originally very protective of Seth and had a tough attitude, but Gunyenji's attitude was even more arrogant than hers, so the nurse couldn't help but cower. She took 2 steps back and stammered, Doctor?" "Yes." Gunyenji finally took off her sun hat and turned it in her hand. "Get the doctor here. Hurry." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a faint sense of authority. The nurse's shoulders drooped as she jogged out of the room. A moment later, a doctor with a stethoscope around his neck hurried in. Smith had both hands in his trouser pockets and was also very unhappy with the nurse's attitude. Now that the doctor had come in, Smith didn't need Gunyenji to say anything. He said stiffly with a straight face, "We are the plaintiff's lawyers. According to the law, we want to ask you questions. Please answer carefully." It was the second watch. A reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, intersection. Oh. Chapter 623. The doctor in the white robe nodded coldly. "It's my duty. Ask away." Smith glanced at Gunyenji. Gunyenji took out the questionnaire she had prepared and asked the doctor every question. "May I ask who your patient is?" "Seth, sent here from the Munich District Court last night." "What illness does he have?" "Injuries from a fight. He has a second-degree concussion, a bruised eye, damaged vision in his left eye, and is nearly blind. His left calf is fractured, and his arm also has different degrees of fractures." The doctor spoke in German. Gunyenji had been studying German for over a month and it finally came in handy. However, she still didn't quite understand many of the medical terms, so Smith translated from the side for her to get the gist. "What a pity. Why didn't she just kill him?" Gunyenji and Smith both sighed. The doctor was speechless. After memorizing what the doctor said, Gunyenji passed the questionnaire to the doctor. "Take a look. If there are no mistakes, please sign at the bottom." The doctor was stunned and looked up at her as if he had never signed something like this before. Smith often did this in the United States. He pointed to the signature area. "Here. We'll leave after you sign it." The doctor looked at Smith suspiciously again and carefully read the questionnaire from beginning to end twice before signing his name at the bottom. Handing the questionnaire back to Gunyenji, he looked at her again before walking to Seth's bed and bending over to check on his injuries. Seth was still wailing, his voice hoarse and unpleasant to listen to. Gunyenji put away the questionnaire and didn't want to stay there a moment longer. "Smith, let's go." Gunyenji gave Smith a look. Smith nodded and didn't say goodbye to the doctor before leaving Seth's room with Gunyenji. When they got into the car, Gunyenji asked Smith, "What do you think about Seth's injuries?" Smith smiled nonchalantly. "It doesn't matter if he's telling the truth or not. With us watching, he can forget about getting bail." The doctor had signed the form, and if he had falsified it, he would be punished by the law. Gunyenji was relieved. She crossed her arms and closed her eyes to rest in the back seat. For the first time she felt a little lonely. Come to think of it, although her memories started from the age of 12, she had either Huo or Professor He by her side for the past 7 years. These were 2 men who could give her a sense of security. Of course, she trusted Huo more and felt more at ease. She could tell that He Jichu was still holding back. Realizing what she was thinking, Gunyenji frowned slightly. Her emotions surged for no reason as she recalled that He Jichu had already left Germany. Although Huo was in Germany, she didn't know where to find him. But if he was in Germany, he would know that she was here too. Li Haiqing's case caused a sensation throughout Germany, and the plaintiff's legal team that was specially invited from the United States was in the limelight. Although Gunyenji didn't appear in the video, anyone familiar with her would be able to recognize the female lawyer's voice. She felt that Huo probably knew she was in Germany. However, he hadn't come to look for her recently. Perhaps it was because the mission was highly confidential. In Seth's room after Gunyenji and the others left, the doctor came over to remove the splint on his left leg to take a look. The wound on his left leg was swollen and looked frightening. Seth stopped crying and only glared at the doctor. He said hoarsely, "It hurts so much. Can you prescribe me some painkillers?" "Painkillers?" The doctor turned his head and rolled his eyes at him. "If I hadn't made a cut on your leg, you would have shown your weakness today. Those American lawyers are very shrewd. Do you know what the consequences will be if they find out that your injury isn't that serious?" "I don't care what the consequences are." Seth clenched his teeth and punched the bed. "I want to tear that woman apart. She's so hateful. You should stay put. Your parents went through a lot of trouble to get you out of the detention center. Listen to them and don't cause any more trouble." As the doctor spoke, he called the nurse in to change Seth's dressing and give him a sedative so he could sleep for a while. Although Seth's injury wasn't as serious as it was written on the medical record, he was indeed injured, and the beatings weren't fake. In order to make it look real, they went all out and beat Seth up for real. Of course, they avoided the important parts and only hit the areas with thick skin and flesh. They made him look like he was bruised and swollen to fool others. After Gunyenji and Smith left the hospital, Smith first sent Gunyenji back to the Hilton Hotel before taking a car to the law firm branch for a meeting. The other 3 lawyers were already waiting there. Alone in the hotel room, Gunyenji organized the court records from the past few days and filled in the gaps. At the same time, she looked up information for the civil case and wrote a defense statement. She worked until late into the night and felt hungry, so she raised her hand to look at her watch. It was already 10 o'clock in the evening. She wanted to text Machichi and call her to have a good chat. But at this time it was 5 a.m. in the Wuxia Empire, so Machichi must still be sleeping. Calling her was out of the question. Gunyenji was excited and opened the instant messaging app on her phone to send Machichi a text. "Nianzi is here. Chichi, are you still sleeping? I miss you so much. Do you miss me?" After sending the text, she knew Machichi wouldn't reply immediately, so she put the phone down. The next day, Machichi replied to her message. "Ai Ming Chichi the best. Nianji, are you there?" "Nianji is here. Yes, Chichi." "What's up?" "Ai Ming Chichi the best. Nianji, when are you coming back? School has started, and today is the first class meeting. Everyone is talking about you. Nianzi is here, talking about me? What's there to talk about? The case has been delayed by the court for a long time, and the civil case is still scheduled. It's a long story. Ai Ming Chichi the best, huh? How could it be like this? These Germans. They're too two-faced. Nianzi is here, they're indeed two-faced. They're all a bunch of double-minded dogs." The 2 of them cursed the Germans for double-mindedness in unison. They said they flaunted their universal human rights, but in the end they couldn't even bring justice to a foreigner's murder. They were all **T. Gunyenji followed Machichi and scolded them to her heart's content. She felt much better. For the next few days, Gunyenji stayed alone in the hotel to organize the court records from the past few days. She repeatedly reviewed the case information provided by the police and even imagined herself as the defendant's lawyer. She learned how to defend the defendant, then stood in the plaintiff's lawyer's position and attacked the arguments she found. Every time she reviewed it, she learned something new and discovered something new. In this almost schizophrenic work environment, she forgot about the passage of time. Her days were fulfilling and busy. Gunyenji really liked this kind of life. The only drawback was that He Xiaoheng wasn't by her side. She missed him more and more every day, but she had no one to tell. Every time someone called, her heart would beat wildly. But when she picked up, it wasn't him. It was another night. Gunyenji had already gone to bed and drifted off to sleep. She heard her phone ring. She instinctively grabbed it and swiped it open to see that it was another message from Machichi. "Ai Ming Chichi the best. Nianji, when are you coming back?" Gunyenji rubbed her eyes and held her phone as she lay on the bed to reply to Machichi. "I'll be back after the lawsuit is over. I'll have to wait until the results of the first trial are out. Ai Ming Chichi the best. These Germans are so annoying. Can dragging it out solve the problem? They're all ostriches. They think that if they bury their heads in the sand, people won't see their ugly butts. I'm so happy. Ah. Chichi, you're so good at talking." They chatted for a while before Machichi went to class. Gunyenji was completely awake and was about to get up to read some more when she received another text. She had never seen the sender's number before. The message was also very simple. There was only one sentence. "Did you receive the scarf?" Gunyenji's heart couldn't stop pounding. Her hands were shaking so badly that her fingers didn't listen to her. She made a few mistakes when she typed. After trying a few times, she typed, "Who are you?" The other side was silent for a while, then sent a smiling emoji. "What do you think?" Then he reminded her, "Don't tell anyone. You understand?" Gunyanji nodded furiously. Tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. Her chest was filled with an indescribable emotion. She pressed the phone to her chest and closed her eyes. It was like Hu Xiaoheng was right beside her. She tried to call the number and found that it was not in service. Just as she was feeling confused, she received another text. "It's not convenient for me to call. Don't call." Then he must have seen her call. Gunyanji nodded repeatedly. Although the other side couldn't see, she still apologized very carefully and sent a message. "Okay, be careful." The other side was silent for a while before replying, "I miss you." Gunyanji's tears were about to come out. She quickly looked up and forced the tears back. He wasn't by her side, so who was she crying for? She would probably get used to not crying. Gunyanji's fingers rubbed the phone for a long time before replying, "Me too." The other side also waited for a while before replying, "I want to see you. Are you free tomorrow?" "Yes, yes, yes." Gunyanji replied in a hurry. Her fingers weren't nimble anymore. She typed a few wrong words, deleted them and changed them again before finally sending the 3 words. Not to mention that she was fine. Even if she had to be fine. She remembered seeing the weather forecast that it would rain tomorrow. But so what if it rained? Even if it was a knife or a bomb, she would still go. No one could stop her from seeing the person she loved. The other side paused again and sent a small hug emoji. "Okay, come to the Königssee in the Alps at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'll wait for you." Gunyanji replied without hesitation, "Be there or be square." There was no more message from the other side, but Gunyanji was too excited to sleep. This was the first update. A reminder to everyone for their monthly votes and recommendation votes. Chapter 624. Gunyanji picked up her iPad and began searching for information about the Königssee, which was a 2-hour drive from Munich. Beautiful pictures appeared on the iPad. It turned out that the lake was left behind by glacial erosion during the Ice Age. It was a long and narrow waterway between the towering Alps. The lake water was so clear it was a light jade color. It was the bright green flower on a top-quality jade bracelet that wrapped around the mountains like a jade belt. A thin mist floated in the autumn morning, and not far away the Alps were covered in snow. The forest between the mountains was red and yellow, like a picturesque painting. It made the Königssee look like a fairyland. Gunyanji rested her chin on her hands as she laid on the bed to look at the beautiful scenery. She couldn't help blushing. She was going to see Hu Xiao tomorrow. She bought him a Zippo lighter just in time to bring it to him. Munich Regional Hospital stood quietly in the darkness in the same night. The moon in the sky was beautiful and wrapped around the earth like a veil. There were also twinkling stars that dotted the night sky. However, not many people walked around the hospital. The 18th-century stone pavement reflected the moonlight and appeared mottled blue. The middle of the night was the time when people were the most sleepy, and the 2 police officers in front of Seth's room were sprawled on the bench by the door, snoring from time to time, making the hospital seem even quieter at night. Amidst the tranquility of the night, several bird cries suddenly rang out. It was very abrupt. Seth, who should have been sleeping soundly, suddenly opened his eyes and looked around. There was no one else in the room except for him. The window was ajar with only white gauze curtains. The wind blew in, bringing with it the humidity of the night sky. The white gauze curtains billowed like waves. The weather forecast said there would be heavy rain the next day. Not long after, the birds chirped again, this time 5 times in a row. Seth's hands were originally handcuffed to the bed, but the ends of the handcuffs were connected to the bed railings. It wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. It allowed him to raise his arms slightly, but it couldn't be too far from the bed railings. He turned over and pushed the pillow away with his head. With the moonlight shining through the window, he saw a key under the pillow. She moved her head over step by step, picked up the key with her mouth and sat up. Then she turned over and sat up. She bent down and matched the key with her mouth a few times before putting it into the handcuff's keyhole. He clenched his teeth and turned it slightly. With a click, the handcuff on his right hand was finally unlocked. Seth glared hatefully at the handcuffs that restricted his movements and threw them on the ground. Then, with the key in his right hand, he unlocked the left handcuff as well. With his arm free, he swung his arm that had been handcuffed for several days. Then he got up and untied his leg from the sling. The injury on his leg was not a fracture at all. It was just a cut made with a knife. Although it was extremely painful at the time, he hated the doctor who suggested it. But when he saw that the other party's lawyer came and confirmed his injury, he stopped cursing. He also had to take off the splint on his leg and change into the sneakers that he had placed under the bed. He pulled open the curtains and jumped out of the half-open window. Seth's room was on the 3rd floor. It wasn't too high from the ground, but it wasn't too low either. There was a zigzag staircase that led to the 1st floor from the window of his room. It was originally one of the fire escape routes that the hospital had installed according to regulations. His stepfather York had purposely arranged for him to stay here for this convenience. Seeing that the first trial could not be delayed any longer and that the trial would be broadcasted live, it was very likely that he would not be acquitted and would definitely be sent to jail. However, Seth didn't want to go to jail at all, and his stepfather didn't want his authority to be challenged either, so he thought of this. Although he would become a fugitive, it was better than being locked up in jail for the rest of his life. Besides, if he left Germany, the case would drag on indefinitely, and he might not even be a fugitive. He walked down the metal railing of the zigzag staircase, his footsteps hurried. When he reached the last step, he saw a duffel bag in the corner next to the staircase. It was for him. He knew that his mother had secretly told him this when she came to visit him a few days ago. Seth opened it and saw a change of clothes, a car key, a passport with a different name, and a wallet. There was a lot of cash in the wallet as well as a few new bank cards. They weren't in his name or his parents' names, so he didn't have to worry about being discovered when he withdrew the money. With this passport, he could go to any country in the European Union without having to worry about visas. Seth quickly took off the hospital gown and changed into the clothes in the duffel bag. Then he slung the duffel bag on his back and quickly walked out with the car key in his hand. In the lobby of the hospital, several nurses were on the night shift. The lights were bright and there were security guards at the door. Seth turned around the corner and turned back to look at the castle-like hospital building. He sneered and walked out without looking back. A black SUV was parked not far from the hospital, almost blending into the night. Seth knew that was the car prepared for him. He took out the car key from the duffel bag and pressed it a few times to open the car door remotely. Just as he was about to walk over, he suddenly saw a few men in black walking out from behind the trees on the side of the road and standing beside the SUV. The men in black were all wearing sunglasses. They were tall and muscular, and it was obvious that they weren't good people. Just by standing there, they sent chills down Seth's spine. Seth's heart skipped a beat. He took 2 steps back and turned to run. But when he turned around, he saw a few identical men in black and sunglasses walking over from behind him. The men in black came from the front and back and surrounded him solemnly. Seth's legs trembled uncontrollably, and he almost knelt on the ground. He looked at the men in black and asked, Who are you?" These men in black looked at him silently. No one spoke and no one moved. They were like statues. Seth's legs turned to jelly and he fell to the ground. At that moment, 2 crisp slaps came from behind the men in black. A few of the black-clothed men moved to make way for a path. Seth's eyes widened as he saw a voluptuous woman with long, straight hair, a round face, and Prada floating cloud sunglasses walk over. Beside her was Seth's stepfather York. Thank God. Seth drew a cross in front of his chest and instantly felt strength return to his legs. He pushed himself up and called out, "Father." York nodded at him but didn't say anything. Instead, he stood to the side with a gloomy expression. The lenses of the Prada floating cloud sunglasses were large and round, and they covered half of her face. In the dark, Seth couldn't make out what the woman looked like at all. It was the second watch. A reminder for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Oh, and underscore. Oh, you're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.